Chapter 691. Qin Yining was squeezed by the crowd to the point that her cloak was twisted in front of her, and her hood was hanging halfway on the back of her head. Master Zhong and the others were squeezed to the point that they almost fell, and they had to pull and support each other to prevent themselves from falling to the ground and being trampled on. She struggled to twist her body to look in the direction of the sound of horse hooves and tremors, and her heart was filled with hope. Because such a uniform sound of horse hooves and such a strong tremor on the ground could only be caused by a well-trained army. Qin Yining did not know if Pang Shao would come. The situation in the barracks was not optimistic, so how could Pang Shao privately mobilize the army? Wouldn't that be giving their political opponents something to use against them? But in the depths of Qin Yining's heart, she hoped that Pang Shao would come. They had not seen each other for a long time, and she missed him, worried about him. Although she was very strong, and had the ability to take charge of everything on her own, she still hoped that when she encountered trouble and difficulties, she would have a shoulder to lean on. The soldiers and horses were getting closer little by little, and the sound of horse hooves was getting more and more shocking. When the soldiers and horses got closer to the turbulent crowd, it was like a rushing river meeting a reef, and they quickly split into two groups, galloping left and right to outflank the refugees. The refugees' originally surging anger was now suppressed by the soldiers and horses that suddenly descended from the sky. No matter how useless the army was, no matter how incompetent the commander was, after these days of Pang Zhao's merciless training, these originally oily soldiers had also been trained to the point of oppressing people's hearts. Especially now that they were not going into battle to kill the enemy, but facing these skinny refugees who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. Some of the refugees who had been courageous enough to confront historian Gao earlier were now intimidated by the imposing aura of the army. The clamor and cursing gradually died down, and the crowd froze in place, looking left and right, looking around, everyone's eyes filled with fear. At this moment, a Fergana horse with shiny black hair came out of the crowd like Moses parting the sea. Pang Shao was dressed in black armor, with a red gorilla cloak, and rode over majestically. The fluttering cloak spread out behind him, covering the horse's buttocks. The refugees had never seen such a mighty general, and they were all stunned in place. Qin Yining's almond-shaped eyes seemed to be filled with stars for a moment. She looked back at Pang Shao with joy. Pang Shao sat upright on his horse and looked around for a familiar figure in the crowd. After a while, his gaze finally fell on Qin Yining, who was in a very sorry state because of the crowd. Their eyes met, and Qin Yining couldn't help but smile like an innocent child. Pang Zhao's face was tense as he slowly urged his horse forward. The people blocking the road hurriedly moved aside, afraid that they would be trampled to death by this handsome black horse. The thousands of refugees who were surrounded by the army all looked up at the young general who was slowly stepping into the crowd on a tall horse. "Stop!" Pang Shao reined in his horse and stretched out his hand to Qin Yining, who was a step away. "Still not coming over." Qin Yining looked up at Pang Zhao's tense handsome face. The person who looked fierce to outsiders was holding back a smile, but his eyes were clearly filled with joy. Qin Yining dared to guarantee that if Pang Shao dared to let the people present see his true expression, he would lose all of his dignity. Qin Yining walked towards Pang Shao and placed her snow-white hand on his large hand. Pang Shao bent down and pulled her hand up. His other hand was around her waist, and he placed her in front of him to sit sideways. He pulled over his cloak and wrapped it tightly around her, hugging her tightly with both arms. Qin Yining leaned against Pang Zhao's strong arms and felt extremely secure. She could not help but rub against the cold armor on his chest. Pang Shao said in a low voice, "If you have any problems in the future, let me solve it. Don't tire yourself out, and don't worry about me." Qin Yining's heart warmed when she heard this. She smiled faintly. "How can I not worry about you? After all, the situation is not stable right now, and you have not gained a firm foothold in the army. Pang Shao also chuckled. There was an unprecedented confidence in his laughter, which made Qin Yining's heart skip a beat. Could it be that Pang Shao had already solved the problems in the army? Pang Shao knew that she cared about him, but he was also angry that she acted on her own initiative and worked hard, putting herself in danger. Only the heavens knew how terrified he was when he rode his horse over and saw her slender body being squeezed by the crowd. What if she bumped into something or fell down and got injured? What should he do? While Pang Shao was letting his imagination run wild, Qin Yining found that the situation was temporarily under control. She hurriedly looked at Liao Zhibing below. Liao Zhibing immediately understood and shouted loudly in the crowd, "So what if the army is here? Is the army an accomplice of historian Gao? We have to save philanthropist Liu." The refugees who were intimidated by the army were actually a little scared. But people were like this. When a difficult thing was done by one person, it might be very scary. But when a group of people worked together to boost each other's courage, they would burst out with incredible courage. The people who were cursing historian Gao shouted again, and there were many people who said together, "The officials don't give us a way to live. We are just a group of hungry people, how can we fight against the army? Starving to death is death, fighting to death is also death. I don't want to live today. I would rather die here and save philanthropist Liu and the others." Right. God doesn't give us a way to live. I would rather die than kill historian Gao. With nowhere to vent their anger, they were suppressed by the army that suddenly came. The surging anger was like a flood that met an obstacle. It was either completely blocked or broke the dam. Obviously, the army was not a strong dam. Hot blood rushed to the heads of the refugees again. At the same time, Peng Shao sat on the horse and looked at Huzi and a few Jinghu Wei who were disguised as refugees in the crowd. Huzi and the others immediately moved like loaches in the crowd. Soon, they squeezed to the front of the yamen and led the refugees to charge at the yamen. Historian Gao was so scared that his face was pale and his body was about to go limp. Although these people did not charge at his house, it was still the yamen. Magistrate Yang had just warned him. Before he could think of a solution, these refugees had already charged at the yamen. How could he face Magistrate Yang in the future? His career would be completely ruined. Historian Gao led a few of his brothers and anxiously rushed to the yamen in an attempt to stop these refugees. But who were Huzi and Jinghu Wei? Although their bodies were dirty and their clothes were thin and tattered, their kung fu was solid and solid. With the cooperation of Liao Zhibing, Jing Jie and the others, they quickly broke down the corner door of the yamen. A few people rushed in and lured away the bailiffs and doormen who were blocking the door. Some refugees came in and opened the door. The door of the yamen was immediately opened, welcoming everyone in. The refugees screamed as they rushed in. Panicked, Dianshi Gao shouted, "Stop! Come back! All of you, stop!" Seeing that the commoners had actually charged in, the soldiers remained seated on their horses, as if their mission was just to stand there. Seeing this, Dianshi Gao couldn't help but cry out in anger, "What are you soldiers doing? Go and catch those stinky beggars." Pang Shao snorted coldly. He spurred his horse forward, raised his hand, and lashed out with his whip. The tip of the whip landed on Grand Historian Gao's face. "Trash like you, how dare you criticize me in front of me?" "Ah!" Historian Gao immediately covered his face and howled in pain. His hands were stained with blood. When the citizens who had yet to rush in saw this scene, they stopped in their tracks and cheered. Some even shouted, "Kill him! Kill him!" They picked up stones and horse dung on the ground and threw them at Historian Gao. There were also some hotheads who did not know what was going on. They looked at the beautiful young general whose face was covered by a cloak in admiration. They could not help but be stunned on the spot. Some people even whispered to each other, "This general is a good person." "Who is he?" Some people who knew what was going on were fearful. They trembled and said, "That is Prince Zhongshuan. He is Pang Zhishi who led the Tiger Army to attack our Dian." What? Such a handsome and valiant young ghost general who hated evil as if it was his enemy. He was actually the evil Pang Zhishi who they were so afraid of and could stop children from crying at night. Pang Xiao had never cared about how others judged him. He did not care about the various gazes and discussions. He sat on his horse and looked at Historian Gao coldly. Suddenly, Pang Xiao saw a tall and slender figure standing at the entrance of the yamen from the corner of his eye. The figure was clad in a blue gown. "Blockhead." Pang Xiao's murmur entered Qin Yining's ears. She raised her head and looked at Pang Xiao. She immediately removed her cloak and followed Pang Xiao's gaze. She saw Mu Jinghu smiling and nodding at them. He then lightly jumped over the wall like a ghost and entered the yamen. Qin Yining was shocked. Her first reaction was that Tian Jizi had also come. This was because Mu Jinghu and Tian Jizi were inseparable. Mu Jinghu's mission was to protect Tian Jizi from any harm. If Mu Jinghu left Tian Jizi, wouldn't Tian Jizi be in danger? "Young Master Mu has come here. I'm afraid it's not good," Qin Yining said worriedly. Pang Xiao smiled, "It's fine. Blockhead is trustworthy. I naturally trust him. He has saved my life more than once. I'm just worried about his martial uncle. Even if Tian Jizi comes, I can make sure she can't do anything." As the two spoke, Historian Gao was already dodging left and right in a sorry state. The commoners were addicted to smashing things. They grabbed things to hit Historian Gao. After all, there was limited space in the yamen. It couldn't accommodate so many refugees. Therefore, most of the people stayed outside. They were just short of punching and kicking Historian Gao. The main gate of the Gao residence was tightly shut. However, there were many servants of the Gao residence who climbed up the ladders and climbed up the walls to look outside. When they saw their master being beaten so badly, they all shouted to inform Madame Gao. In the prison, Mu Jinghu, Liao Zhibing, Huzi, and Jingzhe had already successfully found the cell where Madame Zheng was being held. Seeing the wooden cage in the cell, everyone's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Huzi cursed, "Fuck. Damn it. Gao Wenyao is courting death. Is this how you treat people? Old Alliance Master, you've suffered." Liao Zhibing almost cried. Mu Jinghu didn't say anything. He drew his sword and used his inner strength to swing it. The chains on the cell door fell to the ground with a clatter. Chapter 692. Madame Zheng had already heard the commotion outside. At this time, she saw these people rushing in to save her, and she only knew Liao Zhibing. She couldn't help but be surprised. "Mr. Liao, why are you here?" "Old Chief and Wang Yi asked us to save you. There are many twists and turns, and it's hard to explain. Old Chief, please leave with us." Madame Zheng was supported by Liao Zhibing and climbed out of the cage with difficulty. She was covered in dirt and had been in the cage for too long. She couldn't even stretch her legs and feet. At this time, she couldn't even stand up. The people were shocked. Huzi hurriedly squatted in front of Madame Zheng with his back facing her. "Old Madam, can I carry you out?" "You are." "I'm Wang Yi and Wang Fei's bodyguard." Huzi had a dignified appearance and was very likable. At this time, when he smiled, he even revealed his sharp canine teeth. He looked like an innocent child who had not yet shed his childishness. This kind of appearance was the easiest way for the elderly to let down their guard. Madame Zheng's heart seemed to be wrapped in a hot spring. She was no longer pretentious and obediently let Huzi carry her. They walked the route that Jingzhi had already chosen when he was scouting. They avoided everyone's eyes and ears and took advantage of the fact that everyone in the yamen was resisting the attack of the refugees. They jumped over the wall in a deserted place in the backyard. They went through the back alley and directly ran 2 streets down to the carriage that Qin Yining had arranged here. Bing Tang had been waiting here for a long time. When he saw a group of people carrying a person from afar, he knew that the rescue was successful. When he took a closer look, he saw that the little beggar carrying the old madam of Duke Ding was actually Huzi. His dirty face made Bing Tang laugh. When Huzi saw Bing Tang laughing, he also laughed foolishly. Seeing Huzi and Bing Tang like this, Jingzhi was always by Qin Yining's side. He knew the relationship between them and couldn't help but laugh. Madame Zheng also smiled when she saw the familiar Bing Tang. The atmosphere changed from one of panic to one of joy and relaxation. Old Madam. Bing Tang bowed as he approached. Miss Tang, please dispense with the formalities. Madame Zheng smiled and said, It's been a long time since we last met. How have you been? Replying to old Madam, Wang Fei treats this servant like a sister. This servant is fine. Wang Fei ordered this servant to wait here and check on your injuries as soon as possible. Old Madam, please get on the carriage first. Madame Zheng's heart warmed as if she had soaked in a hot spring for 3 days. She smiled and said, It's hard for you to be so considerate. These days, Wang Fei has been so worried that she can't eat or sleep. Ever since she went to the cloth shop and found out about you, she has gone crazy. Every day, all she can think about is how to save you. She doesn't even have the mood to take care of her 2 brothers. Now that you are safe, we can all be at ease. Princess Consort can also sleep peacefully. Bing Tang carefully supported Madame Zheng and helped her into the carriage with Huzi. Bing Tang then entered the carriage and checked Madame Zheng's pulse to see if there were any injuries. Outside the carriage, Jingzhi and Liao Zhibing jumped onto the shafts and drove the carriage away. Huzi and Mu Jinghu looked at each other in tacit understanding and immediately rushed in the direction of Pang Shao. At this time, the yamen was already in a mess. Pang Shao protected Qin Yining and Master Zhong as they retreated from the battlefield. Within the encirclement of the army, Historian Gao and his subordinates were almost turned into clay figurines by the mud, horse dung, and cow dung thrown by the refugees. Although they had sabers with them, they still needed time to draw their sabers before they could wield them. The angry commoners vented all their anger and resentment on them. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too many people and it was inconvenient to surround them, and that the surrounding army made the refugees hesitate and retreat, they would have been beaten into minced meat long ago. Pang Shao and Qin Yining looked on coldly from the side. Seeing that most of the people's anger had been vented, Pang Shao then hugged Qin Yining and urged his horse forward and raised the horse whip in his left hand high up. The well-trained 1,000 soldiers and 50 Jinghu Wei immediately jumped off their horses and stepped forward. They shouted in unison, "Stop!" The sudden shout was extremely intimidating, causing the refugees who had vented a lot of their anger to be stunned on the spot. The mud in their hands even fell to the ground. Historian Gao and his subordinates were finally able to get up in a sorry state. They used their sleeves to wipe the dirt on their faces and spat out a few mouthfuls of mud. Historian Gao held his breath and shook off the dirt on his hands, then wiped his face. He then saw Pang Shao sitting on the horse and angrily reprimanded him. "Your Highness, you're a little too timely in stopping them. Did you deliberately come here to laugh at us?" Pang Shao raised his eyebrows and thought to himself, did this guy become stupid from anger? How dare you? Why aren't you kneeling when you see Wang Yi? The Jinghu Wei shouted loudly. Historian Gao was shocked again. He didn't want to kneel, but his status was there and he had no choice but to kneel. Just as historian Gao hesitantly knelt down, the refugees behind him were much more honest. They were directly frightened by the Jinghu Wei's shout and knelt down uniformly. Pang Xiao looked helplessly at the pitiful refugees and said softly to Qin Yining, who was in his arms with heartache and pity, "I didn't mean to scare them." He then shouted, "Men, arrest historian Gao and vent the anger of the commoners." "Yes, sir." The elite Tiger Guards responded in unison, and with lightning speed, they pinned Librarian Gao to the ground. Librarian Gao was dumbfounded. He struggled to raise his head and roared, "No. You can't treat me like this. I am an official of the imperial court, I am the local historian. I enforce the law impartially and focus on doing your majesty's work. I didn't do anything wrong. How can you arrest me just because a group of poor beggars said something bad about me? I don't accept this. I don't accept this. You don't accept this." Pang Xiao carried Qin Yining and dismounted from the horse. He carefully put on Qin Yining's hood and cloak. Then, he leisurely used the horsewhip to strike his palm and walked towards historian Gao, who was pressed to the ground. Historian Gao struggled to twist his neck and raise his head to look at Pang Xiao. But he only saw a pair of deerskin military boots. The young general, dressed in a scarlet cloak and black armor, looked down with disdain, his handsome face even carrying a bit of a smile. However, no one dared to underestimate his anger at this time, because the pair of phoenix eyes under his sword-like eyebrows were already brewing a storm even colder than the coldest days of winter. "Do you know who this king despises the most?" Pang Xiao waved his whip and Jinghu Wei released his grip on historian Gao. Pang Xiao lifted historian Gao's chin with his boots and coldly patted historian Gao's head with the tip of his whip. "The people he despises the most are cowards like you who bully the weak." Historian Gao's face was full of humiliation. He suppressed his anger and said, "I am an official of the imperial court. Wang Yi is treating me like this. Does he want to cause trouble in the old capital and make the Jinan king unhappy? I said you are a coward. Why did you turn around and bite your master so quickly?" Pang Xiao said in a low voice and then raised his voice to point at the refugees kneeling on the ground. "Although they are poor, although they don't have enough to eat or warm clothes to wear, they still have the courage of a man. They can't stand to see injustice. For their savior, they can raise their arms and cry out. Although their actions are a bit impulsive, but this is the strength of character of the people of Dezhou. This king admires them." Pang Xiao's low voice was very penetrating. All the refugees heard it clearly. All the refugees couldn't help but become excited. They didn't think that the legendary evil embryo who killed without blinking an eye was actually such a reasonable and courageous person. Pang Xiao lowered his eyes to look at historian Gao. "And you? You think you are the local tyrant? You bully the weak, bully men and women. For your useless son, how many families have you forced to break up? I'm afraid you can't even remember how many bad things you have done. Titan is now invading our country's borders. The people in the north have lost their homes. You have the strength to not fight against the foreign enemy. Instead, you are a tyrant. Someone like you who only knows how to use your strength to bully the weak, how can you be called a man? Your balls should have been chopped off and fed to the dogs long ago." Pang Xiao had been in the army for many days. When he communicated with those rough men, he couldn't speak in a polite manner. Moreover, when speaking with those uneducated people, it was not a good idea to speak in a polite manner. Therefore, Pang Xiao used the crudest and most straightforward words to express his views and attitude. He didn't give anyone the chance to misunderstand his actions and position. "Well scolded. Wang Yi is wise." The emotions of the escapees were going through 1,000 twists and turns. At first, they thought that Wang Yi had brought his troops to suppress them. They were already in despair. They thought that they wouldn't starve or freeze to death, but would be killed by the troops of their own country. But things took a turn. This heroic Wang Yi was not the rumored evil spirit. He was actually a very reasonable person. He even stood on the same side as them. Thinking about it carefully, when Dezhou and the Yan dynasty were at war, Wang Yi was a general of Dezhou. Naturally, he would not show any mercy to the Yan dynasty. That was because they stood on different sides. But now, the two countries had become one country. Wang Yi treated them as if they were citizens of the same country. He would not bully the commoners. And the commoners didn't have to be afraid of a general who surrounded their own country. Many of the commoners, who had a deep-rooted impression of Pang Shao, came back to their senses at this moment. They were no longer afraid of him. Instead, they felt that it was a good thing that their country had such an awe-inspiring prince who was good at war. The commoners immediately cheered and shouted, "Long live Wang Yi! Long live Wang Yi!" Qin Yining stood beside the Jinghu Wei people. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but smile. Pang Shao was a smart person. He always knew how to judge the situation. She did not discuss this matter with him, but the two of them had a natural tacit understanding. He could make use of this matter to not only rescue his grandmother, but also change the bad impression he had of the commoners. He could also build up his reputation. In the old capital, what Pang Shao needed the most was a positive evaluation and reputation. Chapter 693. Qin Yining frowned and looked over. She saw Yu Qiyan and Gu Shixiang wearing thick woolen clothes, standing in a hidden corner of the street. Both of them looked very serious and their brows were tightly knitted together, as if the sky was about to collapse. Qin Yining raised her eyebrows in confusion. Just a while ago, these two people were in high spirits and looked like the overlords of the old capital. How did they become like this today? Qin Yining looked at Dianshi Gao, who was prostrating himself at Pang Zhao's feet, and she understood everything. At that moment, Qin Yining was so angry that the roots of her teeth were itching. Previously, she only suspected that Yu Qiyan was behind her grandmother's arrest. Yu Qiyan and Gu Shixiang wanted to force Pang Shao to do something overboard, so that they could use his mistakes to report him to Li Qitian and give Li Qitian a way out. But at that time, there was no evidence to prove that Yu Qiyan was behind it. Now that she saw Yu Qiyan and Gu Shixiang's expressions, how could Qin Yining not understand? Yu Qiyan had finally learned how to scheme, but unfortunately, they were now on the opposite side. Qin Yining took a deep breath and cleared all distracting thoughts. She looked at Pang Shao and Dianshi Gao again. Pang Shao was already half-squatting and pointing his whip at Dianshi Gao's dirty forehead. He said in a low voice, "You are a Dianshi official, but you disregard the lives of the people. You disregard human lives for your own selfish desires and connive with your son to commit crimes. For the sake of robbing other people's property and wives and daughters, you have caused countless cases of injustice and falsehood. There is no meaning to an official like you. This king will sentence you to death today to avenge the people who were wrongly killed by you. You dare." Dianshi Gao anxiously began to kick his legs. But his body was stepped on by Jinghu Wei, so his struggles were futile. "I am an official of the imperial court. Although you are Wang Yi, you have no right to punish me." "No rights?" Pang Shao sneered, "This king punishing evil is your majesty's order. Even if I kill you and report to your majesty will understand that this king is acting in an emergency. If I don't get rid of you, do I have to watch the people turn against me?" Pang Shao looked around at the commoners and then at Librarian Gao. He reprimanded angrily, "Look at the commoners you've bullied. Look at what they've become. Think about yourself. Don't you know how much you've embezzled? Do you want this king to send people to your house to copy it?" Grand Historian Gao was so scared that his whole body started to tremble. This time, he felt cold from his hands to his feet. He didn't want to die, but he didn't want his entire family to die with him. Pang Shao knew exactly what he was thinking and used his family's lives to force him to submit. Grand Historian Gao's body started to tremble. In his fear, he couldn't even control his tongue. He could only shake his head and say that he was innocent. Pang Shao sneered and stood up. He waved his hand and ordered the people beside him, behead him in public. Yes. The crowd responded and immediately dragged Grand Historian Gao out of the crowd. Once he heard the words, behead him in public, Grand Historian Gao was so scared that his whole body stiffened. He cried out loudly that he was wronged. Yu Qiyan, who was in the corner, frowned. He stepped forward and was about to speak when Gu Shixiang pulled on his sleeve. Yu Qiyan turned to look at Gu Shixiang, only to see Gu Shixiang shaking his head at him sternly. Yu Qiyan pursed his lips. His eyes were full of conflict. He wanted to go against Gu Shixiang, but he was afraid that he would anger the old man. If he really angered Gu Shixiang to death, he would no longer have such a loyal and resourceful subject. While he was hesitating, Jinghu Wei had already dragged Grand Historian Gao to the side. The escapees chased after them, craning their necks to watch the show. They were all cheering loudly. Jinghu Wei pulled out his sword. The other two men threw Grand Historian Gao to the ground and retreated to the side. Grand Historian Gao trembled like a sieve. His teeth chattered and a stinky liquid came out from between his legs. Pang Shao turned his head away. Jinghu Wei's men raised their swords. Stop! Who knew that just as they were about to raise their swords, a loud roar could be heard from outside the crowd. Jinghu Wei originally had the opportunity to kill Grand Historian Gao first. However, when he thought about the current situation, if he rashly killed Grand Historian Gao, it would cause trouble for Wang Yi. Thinking of this, Jinghu Wei's men could only temporarily put down their swords and look at the source of the sound like everyone else. The person who came was dressed casually and had an attendant with him. He looked like a rich scholar, but his aura was noble and extraordinary. Grand Historian Gao recovered from his shock. When he saw the person who came, he cried tears of joy and shouted, "Magistrate! Magistrate Yang, save me!" So this was Magistrate Yang. When Pang Shao and Qin Yining first arrived here and the Yu Qiyan held a welcoming banquet for them, except for Deng Minchang, the highest official in the area, Magistrate Yang, was absent. Deng Minchang had been taught a lesson by Pang Shao, but this was the first time Magistrate Yang and the others had seen him. In their impression, this person did not care about his own affairs and did not want to get involved in the battle of the imperial court. He was a person who only wanted to protect himself. Why did he come at this time? Pang Shao said with interest, "Your Magistrate Yang." Magistrate Yang walked quickly to the front of the crowd. His brows were tightly knitted. He suppressed his anger and bowed to Pang Shao. Chapter 694. His words seemed to have opened the floodgates. Curses poured out like a flood, creating a clamor. All the refugees pointed at Magistrate Yang and cursed. Corrupt official. He must have received money from Mr. Gao. Historian Gao has done so many bad things. Little Wang Yi saw injustice and you chased him away. Do you deserve to be a magistrate? Dog official, officials protect each other. You don't give us a way out. Dog official, dog official. Beat him to death. Beat him to death. The anger of the refugees had been appeased by Pang Zhao's righteous actions. Who knew that Magistrate Yang's actions would push the anger of all the people to the next peak? Everyone grabbed mud and stones from the ground and threw them at Magistrate Yang. Magistrate Yang's attendants and guards hurriedly protected him. They opened their arms like old hens, afraid that the magistrate would be hurt. However, there were still a lot of mud and stones thrown at Magistrate Yang's face and head. When had Magistrate Yang ever suffered such grievances? He hurriedly shouted, "It's not that I don't want to punish Historian Gao. It's Prince Zhongshuan who overstepped his authority. Go eat shit. You dog official, don't talk nonsense here." Before Magistrate Yang could finish speaking, he was hit in the face by a pile of horse dung. Baw, 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 baw. Magistrate Yang wiped his face and coughed violently. He had never been in such a sorry state before. However, the people did not give up. They could not find anyone to redress their grievances. Philanthropist Qian was beaten to the ground and was carried to the side. He was still unconscious. They had no food, no water, and no warm clothes. They did not know where their next meal would be. It was so easy for someone to stand up for them, but they were rejected by Magistrate Yang. He said that he overstepped his authority. Wasn't he covering up for his subordinates? Their future was bleak. They had been bullied to this extent. Rather than silently starve or freeze to death, it was better to vent their anger now. The refugees could not take it anymore and rushed forward angrily. Some rushed into the yamen, some rushed in front of Magistrate Yang and Historian Gao, and some rushed in the direction of Gao's residence. Not only that, the desperate refugees hated the rich and powerful families. Some of them even had thoughts of revenge and rushed to other unrelated families. Magistrate Yang saw this and hurriedly waved his arms. "All of you, stop. I will agree to punish whoever you want. Don't be impulsive, don't be impulsive." However, in the chaos, who could hear Magistrate Yang's shouts? Everyone wanted to vent their anger, so they roared and rushed in all directions. Magistrate Yang broke out in cold sweat. If this went on, wouldn't the people near the Yamen's residence? That would be an unprecedented event in the past 100 years. He was just an obscure magistrate. Was he going to be recorded in the history books because of this kind of thing? Even if His Majesty found out, he wouldn't have a good time. Magistrate Yang looked left and right, not knowing what else to do. He suddenly turned around and happened to see Yu Qiyan and Gu Shixiang huddled together in a corner. Magistrate Yang was immediately furious. "Yu Qiyan, you bastard. I'm protecting your people, but now you're shrinking your neck and not caring. Who do you think you are?" However, the crowd was chaotic. No one could hear him even if he cursed. He could not let this matter continue to develop. Magistrate Yang was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. He could only squeeze in the direction of the army. His entourage and guards were busy helping him fend off the refugees who wanted to beat him up. Wang Yi, please wait. Wang Yi, please wait." Magistrate Yang no longer cared about his image. He shouted in the direction of Pang Xiao like a madman. His hair was messy, his clothes were dirty, and horse dung had been thrown at his face. However, he did not care about these things. Pang Xiao did not want to leave at all. Otherwise, their troop would disappear in the blink of an eye. Magistrate Yang would not be able to chase after them. Hearing Magistrate Yang's voice, Pang Xiao turned around. The Jinghu Wei immediately went forward to bring Magistrate Yang over, in case he was beaten to death by the refugees before he could speak to Wang Yi. "Wang Yi." Magistrate Yang panted and said anxiously, "Wang Yi, look at the chaos in the city. How can you just stand by and do nothing?" Pang Xiao jumped off his horse. After standing still with Qin Yining in his arms, he turned to look at Magistrate Yang and laughed. "Didn't Magistrate Yang say that this king is overstepping his boundaries? You told this king to leave, so this king had to leave. You didn't let this king interfere, so this king had to stay out of it. How come this king is standing by and doing nothing? Isn't Magistrate Yang too hard to please?" Magistrate Yang knew that Pang Xiao was blaming him. He did not care about his face at this moment. If the chaos continued, his life and the lives of his family would be lost. Magistrate Yang hurriedly bowed and begged, "Please, Wang Yi, let the troops go and quell this chaos. Otherwise, if it continues, the consequences will be unimaginable." Pang Shao said, "This is what you told this king to do. This king is not acting beyond his authority, right?" "No, no." Magistrate Yang was so angry that his stomach hurt. Pang Shao turned to Qin Yining and said, "Princess, do you think this king should do something?" Qin Yining was actually having a hard time holding back his laughter at this moment. Pang Shao was not a person who fooled around, nor was he a person who disregarded human life. In fact, he had already arranged for people to guard the doors of the surrounding houses. He did this just to scare Magistrate Yang and make him beg him. Qin Yining pretended to ponder and said, "Actually, Wang Yi was framed and accused of overstepping his authority. I also feel bad. But Wang Yi still wants to cooperate with Magistrate Yang sincerely to ensure the stability of the old capital." "All right." Pang Shao smiled and said, "Then I'll listen to Princess." The Jinghu Wei were already used to the love between Pang Shao and Qin Yining. But the elites in the army did not know. They only thought that Pang Shao was a tough man. Who would have thought that this tough man also had a soft side? Moreover, Wang Yi did not mind showing his love for his wife in front of outsiders. He was even willing to let her express her views on this matter. This kind of respect was not something that any man could give to his wife. These days, the men were already convinced by Pang Shao. Now that they saw Pang Shao doting on his wife so much, it seemed even more precious in their eyes. Everyone chuckled. Pang Shao turned around and said loudly, "Brothers, quickly go and stop the refugees. Don't stand here and laugh." Yes. The army, Jinghu Wei, and Pang Shao had arranged for people in plain clothes to hide in the dark. They immediately took action. In less than half an hour, the riot scene calmed down. It was no longer the shock of thousands of people roaring. Only the occasional scolding could be heard. Pang Shao stood in the middle of the open space and said loudly, "Fellow villagers, everyone be quiet. Listen to this king." Huzi and Mu Jinghu, who were squatting in the crowd, looked at each other. Huzi immediately said loudly, "Everyone, be quiet. Listen to what Wang Yi has to say." Mu Jinghu also used his arm to nudge the person beside him. "Listen to what Wang Yi has to say. Wang Yi is a good person." Some people mixed in with the refugees passed the message to each other. The emotions of the refugees quickly calmed down and everyone became quiet. Pang Shao said loudly, "Fellow villagers, just now Magistrate Yang told this king that he is willing to agree to any of your requests as long as everyone stops making trouble." This king thought that Magistrate Yang said this for everyone's sake. So he helped him to make peace with everyone. Look, if this continues, everyone's ending will not be good in the end. Also, those who want to rob others in anger, don't you think that's right? If they are caught by the imperial court, won't they be beheaded? You have been wronged and scolded others in anger. This is human nature. Anyone who knows will sympathize with everyone. But if everyone really becomes murderers who caused riots, then the only thing the imperial court can do is to send troops to quell the riots. In history, do you know what happened to the people who gathered to cause trouble? Pang Zhao's voice was loud and clear. His words were clear and easy to understand. When everyone calmed down, he gently explained the consequences. Although he did not say that he was blaming them, he was already very good at scaring them. The commoners were only blinded by anger for a while. Everyone was used to knowing their place. How many of them had the courage to accept the punishment of the law? Who would sincerely want to do evil? Who would not be afraid of death? Thus, the Peng Zhao's words caused everyone to consciously shut their mouths. Furthermore, they all started to panic. Pang Shao paced quietly, giving all the refugees enough time to think about the consequences if they continued to do evil. When everyone knew what fear was, he continued. So now that Magistrate Yang has agreed to your conditions, he is really taking care of everyone. Magistrate Yang is a scholar. He is a little pedantic, but his heart is not bad. If you have any difficulties, just tell me. I will be here as a witness. We have experienced war and famine. It was not easy to survive. There is no need for us to harm others. Don't you think so? Aren't we doing this for our wives and children to live a good life? Yes, we just want to live. In the crowd, someone covered his face and sobbed. Her crying really made everyone feel sad and shed tears along with her. Everyone started crying. They were hungry, braved the cold wind, made such a big scene, went through so many twists and turns, and almost lost their lives. Finally, they got a chance to negotiate with an official. Everyone had a lingering fear and panic in their hearts after surviving a disaster, as well as infinite panic and fear for the future. We just want to live and have a meal. We want Librarian Gao to get the punishment he deserves. We also want Librarian Gao to release the great philanthropist he has captured. Also, we want to have a warm place to live. If the conditions are not good, it doesn't matter if we adults are a little cold. At least give my children and my 80-year-old mother a warm place to spend the winter. Everyone was talking at once about their conditions. However, none of the conditions they proposed were excessive. Their conditions made Qin Yining's heart ache when she heard them. These were the simple people. They had no ambition, and they did not want glory and wealth. They just wanted to live and let their families live. They wanted to be filial to the old and let their children live a better life. To put it bluntly, what they wanted was the most basic dignity as a human being. But in this chaotic world, even such a simple wish could not be realized. Qin Yining lowered his lonely eyes, and there were tears of sadness in his eyes. The Yu Qi Yen, who was standing in the corner and still in shock, also felt an indescribable sadness, pain, and deep guilt. These were all his former subjects. His subjects just wanted to live a decent life, but as an emperor, he could not do that. His country was destroyed, he lost his home, and he caused the death of his wife and concubine. Now, he was still at death's door, and he wanted to regain power in Dian. He did not have close contact with these people, so he had never considered their thoughts and feelings. In the cold wind, the Yu Qi Yen looked at the refugees in ragged clothes, listened to their humble begging and crying, and for the first time, questioned his own heart with a heavy heart. Did he really do the right thing? Pang Zhao's heart was also heavy. He lowered his eyes and looked at Magistrate Yang, who had a tense expression on his face, and asked in a deep voice, "Magistrate Yang, did you hear that?" Chapter 695. Pang Zhao's voice was not very loud this time, but every word was sonorous and forceful, piercing Magistrate Yang's eardrums. As an official, do you only want fame and fortune? Your Majesty led us to overthrow the muddle-headed tyranny of Beiji, not for your own selfish desires, but for the people of the world. Magistrate Yang is not a dull person. Since you have ambitions, why don't you start by doing something for the people? Magistrate Yang was not convinced by Pang Zhao. However, after today's confrontation, Magistrate Yang had fully realized the power of the person in front of him. Pang Zhao had slapped him in the face in front of everyone, and in turn, he had to beg him to settle the matter. Up until now, although Pang Zhao was reprimanding him, what he said was also to save some face for him in front of the people. He really wanted to save his face. Magistrate Yang covered his face with shame and cried, sighing, "Do you think I want the people under my rule to suffer so much?" But natural disasters and man-made disasters continue for years. Even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice. Pang Xiao narrowed his eyes. Magistrate Yang's words were beautiful. He cleared himself completely, but threw the blame to the world, indirectly pushing the responsibility to the present emperor. Pang Xiao did not care about Li Qitian, but he cared about the suffering of the people. The first thing he did when he came to the south was to maintain stability. Once there was a war or a revolt, the people would be the unlucky ones in the end. Now that it was easy to calm the people's resentment, he could not make waves again because of Magistrate Yang's evasive words. Pang Xiao turned to face the crowd and said with a comforting smile, "All right, my fellow villagers, don't be sad. Look, the prefectural magistrate has already heard everyone's heartfelt wishes. He has already arranged for everyone's living quarters, arranged for everyone's work, ensured everyone's safety, and severely punished Gao Wenyao. Let's let the magistrate say a few words, okay?" Pang Xiao moved sideways and left the situation to Magistrate Yang. Magistrate Yang coughed. How could he agree to all these? It was Pang Xiao who agreed on his behalf. But now that things had come to this, Magistrate Yang had no other choice. In order to prevent these vicious people from causing trouble again, he could only pinch his nose and agree. He raised his hands to signal the crowd to be quiet. I am not ignorant of the people's sufferings. In fact, even if you did not come to find Gao Wenyao today, I have long disliked his perverse behavior. The reason why I did not punish him severely was that there was insufficient evidence before, so I investigated for a long time before I could carry it out. I was going to punish him, but I did not expect you all to be one step ahead of me. Magistrate Yang wrinkled his nose. The smell of the horse manure on his face was too pungent, but now he could only endure it. Wanting to end the battle quickly, so that the people's attention could be turned to other things. Gao Dianshi was pressed down on the ground. When he heard that Pang Xiao was going to punish him, he was already scared out of his wits. But there was still a little hope in his heart. Magistrate Yang had talked to him before and knew that there was someone behind him. Magistrate Yang would not be willing to offend the person behind him. But now, Magistrate Yang obviously wanted to use him to shut Yuyu's mouth. Librarian Gao struggled anxiously and shouted, "My lord! You can't do this, I am. Gag his mouth and take him away." Yes. The followers who had been beaten by the refugees for a long time had long been suppressing their anger. If not for Magistrate Yang, they would not have to suffer with the prefectural governor. Moreover, Magistrate Yang was usually domineering. Even his followers hated him. It was just that they did not want to hurt each other. The crowd immediately followed the order. They grabbed a handful of soil and stuffed it into Magistrate Yang's mouth. Then they lifted him up with his hands behind his back. Magistrate Yang struggled with all his might. He spat out the soil in his mouth and tried to defend himself. But Magistrate Yang was determined to punish him. How could he have a chance to defend himself? Magistrate Yang disregarded human life. The evidence is conclusive. Take him away and execute him immediately. Magistrate Yang waved his sleeves righteously. It was as if he was not covered in dirt, but wearing an official's robe in the hole. Good. Good. Magistrate Yang is wise. The commoners were stunned for a moment. Then they immediately jumped up and cheered loudly. The cheers of nearly 1,000 people shook the surrounding houses and courtyards. This was the first time that they, as commoners of the lowest class, had risked their lives to fight for the results they wanted. No matter how sullen Magistrate Yang was in his heart, he could not help but show some pride in the situation of the commoners. It was as if he had eaten honey in his heart. He even temporarily forgot the stench on his face. Qin Yining quietly watched this for a while. She could not help but quietly step forward and stand beside Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao's 5 senses were outstanding. Naturally, he noticed Qin Yining's first step. When she came to his side, he immediately grasped her slightly cold fingers with his big hand and held them tightly in his hand. Although he did not turn his head to look at her, his face was serious and his eyes were fixed in front of him. His hand was warm and dry. He often used his fingers to mischievously tickle Qin Yining's palm. Qin Yining could not help but laugh softly. The two of them stood hand in front of the army and Jinghu Wei. Their warm appearance made people feel warm and envious. Standing in the corner, Yu Qiyan, who had suffered a heavy blow, stared blankly at Qin Yining's side profile. For a moment, he had an impulse to run away and save his face. What was called a crushing defeat? He was like this. He had lost his country, the throne, his family, and the people's hearts. He could not even win the heart of a little girl. Gu Shixiang saw Yu Qiyan standing there blankly and looking at Qin Yining. He still looked as if he had suffered a heavy blow. Gu Shixiang felt even more disappointed. At this juncture, wasn't the overall situation the most important thing? How could he still be in the mood to think about women? Gu Shixiang shook his head in defeat. It was easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. Unless he had completely changed his mind, or else, as soon as she saw the Qin family, the position of mountains and rivers in Yu Qiyan's heart would shift. Just as the two of them were letting their imaginations run wild, the commoners at the corner of the street had already rushed anxiously in a certain direction. They saw that Librarian Gao had already been forced to kneel on the ground. An executioner raised a demon head knife high. As Librarian Gao shook his head violently, the executioner viciously chopped down. Fresh blood splattered on the white wall opposite them. That was the wall of the Gao residence's backyard. The warm, scarlet liquid melted the thin layer of snow on the ground. A round head rolled to the side. The Gao family servants who had been climbing the ladder to see what was happening outside screamed in fright. They immediately fell down the ladder. Oh no, the old master has been beheaded. The servants hurriedly replied to the inside of the room. When Gao Jinshe heard this, her eyes rolled back and she fainted. No matter how chaotic the Gao family was, they would never dare to open the door to argue with Magistrate Yang and the commoners. Everyone finally vented their anger and cheered. Their joy was overflowing, as if they had received the most precious treasure in the world. The joyous laughter was a stark contrast to the loud cries in the Gao residence. Magistrate Yang then ordered the people around him to make arrangements for the commoners' meals. There was no one to run the kanji factory, but they couldn't let the commoners starve on New Year's Eve. If the commoners were dissatisfied and made a fuss, the situation might be even worse than now. Qin Yining saw that Magistrate Yang had arranged everything neatly, so he quietly scratched Pang Zhao's palm. Pang Zhao's large hand immediately grasped hers. He cupped his hands and said goodbye to Magistrate Yang. Official Yang, farewell. Magistrate Yang turned around, the corners of his mouth twitching. It was obvious that he had sent his troops into the city without permission. Not only could he not censure him, but he also had to thank him. Moreover, when he thought about it carefully, he didn't agree to those conditions willingly. It was obvious that he fought wherever Pang Zhao pointed. He had been used, yet he still had to thank him. Words couldn't express how he felt. Thank you, Wang Yi, for your help. Take care, Wang Yi. Official Yang, please stay. Pang Zhao turned around and put his arm around Qin Yining's waist. He put her on the horse's back and then sat behind her. The army and Jinghu Wei also got on their horses. When the refugees saw that Pang Zhao was about to leave with the army, they shouted loudly, "Thank you, Wang Yi. Wang Yi, good people will be rewarded." Good people. Magistrate Yang was so angry that his nose was crooked. He pulled a long face and ordered his subordinates, "You guys, quickly set up the congee stall. Go and buy the food first." After saying that, he hurriedly left. He had no choice. His body was dirty and his face was full of horse dung. He was afraid that he would only feel better after washing off a layer of his skin. Gu Shixiang watched the farce from beginning to end. He didn't see the result that he had tried so hard to see. The frustration and anger in his heart were about to boil. Surnamed Zhao, is it really good luck or good planning? On the way back, Gu Shixiang couldn't help but ask himself in a low voice. Yu Qiyan was immersed in a disappointed mood. When he suddenly heard Gu Shixiang's voice, he was stunned for a moment. After a long time, he gathered the cloak around his shoulders and buried his face in the collar of the white fox fur. He whispered, "I think it's really good luck." Then he chuckled. His luck is actually with the Qin clan. If he didn't know that the Qin clan was here, he wouldn't have come. The Qin clan, the Qin clan. Why does Wang Yi always think of the Qin clan? Gu Shixiang was very angry at Yu Qiyan's words, but he couldn't lose his temper. He could only suppress his anger and whispered, "If he came to find the Qin clan, why did he have to bring so many troops? If this matter has something to do with the Qin clan, I believe that the husband and wife work together." Yu Qiyan looked at Gu Shixiang in a daze. His muddled thoughts gradually became clear. So this time, it's very likely that Zhao is behind this. Gu Shixiang nodded and said in a deep voice, "When you don't understand something, you only need to analyze it and see who benefits in the end. Think about it." After such a big trouble, Zhao's appearance not only solved the problem, but also made the people look at him in a new light. How much benefit did he gain? That's true. Yu Qiyan said in a deep voice, "Zhao used to be a terrifying figure in our Dayan. There was no one who wasn't afraid of him. He even led the army to besiege the city when the country was invaded. But look at the people now. Who still dares to criticize him?" Gu Shixiang sighed. This time, he took the opportunity to gain a foothold in the old capital. Not only did he show off his skills, but he also won over the hearts of the people. We've schemed so much, but he's the one who benefited. I still don't know how to explain this to the head shopkeeper. Chapter 696. Gu Shixiang and Yu Qiyan were both silent for a long time. They didn't say a word all the way to the Yan dynasty's palace. When they returned to the sleeping quarters where Yu Qiyan was temporarily staying, Yu Qiyan dismissed the people around him and said, "Mr. Lu once said that the four-way shop didn't want anything from us when they helped us. What's more, we've arranged everything perfectly this time. The problem lies with Gao Wenyao's good-for-nothing son. If he hadn't gone to the brothels and did such a wicked thing outside, he wouldn't have been crippled, and all these things wouldn't have happened." Gu Shixiang was already used to Yu Qiyan's naivety, but when he heard him speak so optimistically, he couldn't help but feel angry. He lowered his voice and tried his best to keep it calm. "The four-way shop is a century-old brand. They contacted us for no reason. Does Wang Yi think that they don't want anything from us? The four-way shop had a long history. It could even be traced back to before the Dayan and Northern Ji dynasties were established. It had a history of more than 200 years. The industries involved were enough to cover all walks of life. Agriculture, industry, shipping, land transportation, there was nothing that the four-way shop couldn't do." Even Yu Qiyan, as the last emperor of the Yan dynasty, had never formally met the mysterious head shopkeeper. He had only met with one of the head shopkeepers a few times, which was enough for him to benefit immensely. But Yu Qiyan, the last emperor of the Yan dynasty, had never formally met the mysterious head shopkeeper. He had only met the head shopkeeper a few times, which was enough for him to benefit greatly. They were able to smoothly establish themselves in the south and quickly gain a foothold in the old capital because the four-way shop had helped them a lot. They weren't old acquaintances. Gu Shixiang didn't believe that the four-way shop would want to help Yu Qiyan restore the Dian for no reason. Could it be that the head shopkeeper of the four-way shop was in a good mood and wanted to do a good deed every day? That was simply impossible. Yu Qiyan was speechless at Master Zhong's question. He gradually understood the meaning behind it. He coughed awkwardly and said, "It's already like this. Apart from explaining it to Mr. Liu the next time I see him, there's no other way." His words hit the nail on the head. If they tried their best to shirk responsibility, it would give people the impression that they were not being honest enough. After all, the four-access shop could be said to be so rich that it could rival a country. Their head shopkeeper was definitely not a mediocre person. Gu Shixiang sighed and said, "Forget it, that's all we can do. I'll go back and send an invitation. No matter what, I'll have to meet with the head shopkeeper of the four-way shop and talk things over face to face." Yu Qiyan also said, "Exactly." At this moment, Peng Xiao was hugging Qin Yining's waist as they slowly followed behind Jun and Jinghu Wei's troops. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. At this time, Qin Yining only hugged Peng Xiao's thin waist and rested his face on his chest. He asked in a low voice, "Are you going back to the barracks later?" "I'll just send them back, and then I'll go home with you." "Really?" A smile climbed onto Qin Yining's face. She happily sat up straight and raised her head to look at his handsome profile. She smiled and said, "That's great. Han Gu and Zhao Gu Er's big eyes look around every day. I can see that they're looking for you. When you're not home, they miss you very much." Her undisguised joy made her look like a child who had gotten candy. Peng Zhao's heart was both happy and guilty. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. The blood in his veins almost melted into honey, but he still wanted to take advantage of her with his mouth. "Only our son misses me. You don't miss me." His mouth was not idle. His big hand also unscrupulously reached into her small jacket under the cloak. He rubbed her slender waist through the layer of clothes and gradually moved upwards. Qin Yining's face flushed red. She quickly twisted her body to avoid his hand and said in a low voice, "What are you doing? Don't mess around. Then tell me, did you miss me?" Peng Zhao's hand held her waist and did not move. Qin Yining stubbornly said, "We haven't seen each other for only a few days. What's there to miss? Is that so?" Peng Xiao held back his laughter. His back was ramrod straight on the horse's back, and his expression was also serious. However, his hand didn't hesitate to cover the mountain range that he had been thinking about for a long time. He said in a low voice, "Sister E, this place of yours is bigger than before. I can't even hold it with one hand." "You." Qin Yining forcefully twisted a few times and pushed his hand away. Peng Xiao was irritated by her touch, but he knew his limits. He could not tease her too much. He was afraid that she would fall, so he hugged her tightly and whispered in her ear, Okay, I won't tease you anymore." Qin Yining's face and ears turned red. She was embarrassed and angry, but she did not want to appear too petty. She forced herself to change the topic. "You brought so many people here today. It really scared me. Have you dealt with the matters in the barracks? How did you manage to subdue Deng Minchang?" Peng Xiao also wanted to change the topic. He said, "The situation in the barracks is much more complicated than it looks. Although Deng Minchang has been corrupted by wine, meat, gold, silver, and beautiful women, he is not the one who calls the shots in the barracks." "Oh." Qin Yining said in surprise, "Isn't he the head of the barracks? If he doesn't call the shots, who does?" Pang Shao smiled and said, "You also know that half of the soldiers in the barracks are the ones who followed my tiger army to conquer Dian." Qin Yining nodded. "Back then, those people were trained by me to the point where they could fight against 10 people at once. However, now that the war is over, they have degraded to the point where they complain when they run with weights on, let alone the other half of the soldiers who have not been trained by me." From Deng Minchang, the commander-in-chief, to the soldiers, it is like a plate of loose sand. Deng Minchang has even given his authority and responsibility to his deputy, Lu Zhang. He spends his days indulging in wine and women. Even if I am present, he might not be willing to share the joys and sorrows of the soldiers. Lu Zhang has built up quite a bit of prestige in the barracks. Many of the soldiers listen to him. Originally, I did not have complete control over the army. However, Lu Zhang fell ill a few days ago. I felt that it was a rare opportunity, so I took the opportunity to make a move. Qin Yining was shocked when he heard this. "I didn't expect there to be so many twists and turns." Now that you are in charge, Deng Minchang has no reaction. He is used to enjoying himself. It seems like anyone can be the commander of the army. He flatters me in front of me, but then he turns around and flatters Lu Zhang. Then he really has no stance. Qin Yining sighed softly. That's good too. Otherwise, who knows how many twists and turns there will be. Qin Yining nodded in agreement. Pang Shao sent the troops all the way back to the barracks. He lectured them for a while before instructing them to go back to rest. Then, he brought Qin Yining back to the residence. Qin Yining did not feel tired at all riding with him. The two of them did not ride very fast. Pang Shao cherished and enjoyed the opportunity to speak with Qin Yining alone. "Next time, no matter what you want to do, you have to tell me. I will do my best to cooperate with you. Don't make things difficult for yourself because of me like this time. Do you understand?" Qin Yining listened to his nagging along the way. He did not have to ask Pang Shao why he came at such a coincidence or why he made such arrangements. He knew that everything he did was for her own good, so he obediently agreed. They returned to the Qin residence. As soon as they entered, they saw Mu Jinghu and Huzi, who had already tidied themselves up. The two of them had blended in with the refugees and stirred up everyone's emotions. Their cooperation was flawless. The refugees did not notice any flaws in their act. Now, they looked completely different. "Blockhead." Pang Shao smiled and strode forward. He patted Mu Jinghu's shoulder and said happily, "Why did you think of the old capital? Did you come with your martial uncle?" Actually, Pang Zhao's current position was really not suitable for him to directly ask Mu Jinghu about Tianjizi. However, he asked openly. Mu Jinghu was also open in his heart. He smiled and shook his head. "No, I came out on my own. Martial uncle instructed me to come to the south. He said that there would be a big show to watch. He asked me to stay here and watch the show, lest I become stupid." This really sounded like something Tianjizi would say. Although their standpoints were different, Tianjizi was still a wonderful person in some aspects. The group walked into the inner residence. Qin Yining asked worriedly, "How is my grandmother? Where is she now?" Huzi said seriously, "Princess consort, you don't have to worry." Duchess Ding went to the Snow Pear courtyard with Bing Tang. Bing Tang said that old madam's life is not in danger. It's just that because of the spring and autumn, she went through a period of imprisonment. That person surnamed Gao even locked her in a cage. After going through such torture, her body can't take it anymore. She needs to recuperate well. Qin Yining's heart ached when he heard this. He hurriedly ran to the Snow Pear courtyard. Currently, there were no other women living in the Qin residence. In addition, for convenience and safety, everyone lived in the Snow Pear courtyard. Therefore, Pang Shao directly pulled Mu Jinghu and Hu Zi along with him. As soon as Qin Yining entered, he saw Qiu Lu and Lian Xiaozhou carrying food boxes to the side room. Seeing Qin Yining return, the two hurriedly bowed and said, "Princess consort, you're back." "Yes." "Where's my grandmother?" "She's here." Qiu Lu first held up the bamboo curtain for Qin Yining. Qin Yining did not care about anything else and quickly rushed in. There was a bitter smell of medicine in the room, as well as the smell of roasted wine. After turning a corner and entering the inner room, he saw Duchess Ding's wife, Madame Jing, leaning against a soft pillow and sitting on an arhat bed. Bing Tang was beside her tidying up a pile of bottles and jars. Qin Yining suddenly stopped in his tracks. He had not seen Madame Jing for a long time. Her hair had turned white, and she seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. He could not help but tear up. "Grandmother." Madame Jing saw Qin Yining. With tears in her eyes and a smile on her face, she reached out to her and said, "Sister Yi, come here and let grandmother take a look. We haven't seen each other for so long. Our sister Yi is already a mother. I just saw Han Gu and Zhao Gu. Both of them are very cute." Chapter 697. Madame Zheng smiled and gently stroked Qin Yining's hair with her skinny fingers. She did not expect that she would be able to meet Qin Yining again this time. She also did not expect that Qin Yining would treat her so well. In order to rescue her, he actually made such a big fuss. She knew that she did not treat Qin Yining well. This child had been lonely since young and was not fated to be raised by his biological parents. Even if he returned home and faced his blood-related relatives, they were still strangers who had just met. Moreover, her daughter's personality was like that. She knew that the Sun clan did not treat Qin Yining well enough. But what about her? Her relationship with Qin Yining wasn't so deep as soon as they met. After the incident at Ding General Manor, Madame Zheng's heart was filled with hatred. She wanted to take revenge so much that she almost went crazy. She even used Qin Yining and in the end, threw the mess of Qingtian alliance to her. Although Qin Yining took over Qingtian alliance and had useful people in his hands, Madame Zheng also knew that the group of people in the pugilistic world was not so easy to manipulate. Qingtian alliance was equivalent to a double-edged sword. She gave Qin Yining the position of the alliance leader and gave her useful subordinates, but in fact, she also let go of her own hands and stopped interfering in these matters. She cleared her family of all responsibility and threw the trouble to Qin Yining. After Madame Jing brought the Sun clan's womenfolk to settle down in the south, Qin Yining took care of them openly and secretly. Their lives gradually got on the right track. No matter whether it was Qin Yining's act of bravely stepping forward to help the Sun clan's male servants when Ding General Manor was in trouble, or Qin Yining's unconditional care of the Sun clan's womenfolk, Madame Jing remembered it all in her heart. She always wanted to find an opportunity to repay this child. That was why she opened a cloth shop in the old capital. That was why she immediately came first when she knew that Pang Shao and Qin Yining were here by imperial decree. She wanted to help her establish connections and clear the obstacles. It was a pity that she was old, and her plans were not flawless. It's my fault for being useless. I did something bad with good intentions. I wanted to help you, but the more I tried, the more trouble I caused. Madame Zheng sighed helplessly. Qin Yining hurriedly shook his head. He held Madame Zheng's hand and said, "Grandmother, don't say that. We are a family. Why should we care about such trivial things? By the way, due to the circumstances back then, Wang Yi didn't even have the chance to greet you when I got married." Qin Yining turned around and looked at Pang Shao, who had been standing at the door. Pang Shao immediately strode forward and bowed to Madame Zheng in the manner of Qin Yining. After kowtowing, he respectfully called out, "Grandmother." Madame Zhang looked at Pang Xiao with a complicated expression. She did not respond for a long time. Pang Xiao knelt in the same place. He knew that Madame Zhang must have a knot in her heart about him, so he was not anxious, nor would he urge her. He just knelt respectfully. In the war between the two countries, he was the vanguard of attacking Dian. In Xihua City and other places, he had fought with Duke Ding's family. The old Duke Ding and the general of the Sun family were both unyielding men. He admired them very much. It was just that the two sides had different standpoints and stood in a hostile position. In addition, Your Majesty had thought of that kind of malicious trick at that time, saying that the Empress Dowager wanted to eat a smart person's brain to cure her illness. Not only did he force the great talent Sun Yu to death, but he also shocked the fatuous emperor into destroying Duke Ding's family. Even children of a few years old did not escape the fate of being beheaded. Although all was fair in war, Pang Xiao still felt sorry for the men of the Sun family. He even secretly went to collect the bodies of the men of the Sun family, but Sister Yi beat him to it. Duchess Ding naturally did not know what he was thinking and what he was doing secretly. In Madame Zhang's eyes, Pang Xiao was probably just the culprit who had colluded with Li Qitian to destroy the Sun family. Thinking of this, Pang Xiao even felt that Madame Zhang had good self-restraint by not slapping him hard. Qin Yining looked at Pang Xiao and then at Madame Zhang. He called nervously, "Grandmother." Madame Zhang sighed helplessly and said, "Get up. Let's sit down and talk." Seeing that Madame Zhang's expression was normal, Qin Yining was slightly relieved and stood up with Pang Xiao. They each took a chair and sat on the edge of the bed. Madame Zhang looked at Pang Xiao and said, "I actually hated you before." Qin Yining frowned worriedly. Pang Xiao also smiled helplessly and did not say anything. Madame Zhang said, however, as time passed, the sadness faded a little. "When I was able to calm down and think, my hatred for you was not so deep. Moreover, you have become my grandson-in-law. In order to find Sister Yi, you even went against 33 imperial edicts and personally led people to Taitan to find her. Not only did you not suspect her, but you have also been so good to her. Just by looking at this, I feel that you are a good child." Hearing Madame Zhang's words, Qin Yining suddenly breathed a big sigh of relief. Pang Xiao was still smiling and waiting for Madame Zhang to continue. "When Beiji and Dian were fighting, Sister Yi's father used a trick and indirectly harmed your father. Although the main reason for General Feng's death was the suspicion of the incapable ruler of Beiji, Sister Yi's father did use a trick. There was a father's enmity between the two of you, but you were able to let go of your hatred and treat her well. Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. I have lived for so long, so how can I not let go of my hatred? Although you were the vanguard of the attack on Dian, you are also responsible for the deaths of the Duke and my children and grandchildren. However, the main responsibility does not lie with you. You were just following orders. If you want to blame someone, you have to blame the incapable ruler and the demon empress. You have to blame the demon empress's father, Guozhang Chao. I have already taken my revenge and let go of my hatred. Now, I see that you are so good to Sister Yi. Sister Yi is also sincerely living with you. Let's put aside the enmity of the past." Madame Zhang's words moved Pang Xiao and Qin Yining's hearts. It was rare for Madame Zhang to think so clearly. Qin Yining thought that he would have to spend a lot of effort to persuade her, but he did not expect the matter to be resolved so easily. "Grandmother, have you really let go of your hatred?" Qin Yining held Madame Zhang's hand and shook it. Madame Zhang sighed and said, "What else is there to let go of? The dead have passed away, and the living have to continue living. Do you think I will never let go of the so-called hatred for the sake of the dead and disturb your peaceful life? Moreover, every injustice has its perpetrator and every debt has its debtor. I am not an unreasonable person, so how can I vent my anger on him? Qin Yining almost cried. She blinked hard and held back the tears that were surging fiercely. She held Madame Zhang's hand and said, "Grandmother, it's great that you can let go of your hatred." Pang Xiao also stood up and bowed. "Grandmother, thank you." Madame Zhang smiled. "We are family, so there is no need to thank me. Do you think that I am a stubborn person?" "Of course not." Qin Yining hurriedly explained. Madame Zhang smiled and tapped Qin Yining's forehead. She saw that her granddaughter's face was filled with sincere joy without any haze. She also saw that although Pang Xiao was standing to the side, his warm and gentle gaze landed on Qin Yining. His eyes were full of love and adoration. These two children had true feelings for each other. To be able to find someone they truly loved at such a young age, form a family together, and support each other without leaving or abandoning each other, as a grandmother, what high requirements could she have for her grandson-in-law? Once the words were spoken, the tense atmosphere in the room suddenly relaxed. Qin Yining smiled and told Madame Zhang about the Sun clan and family matters. Later, she instructed the servants to prepare a New Year's Eve dinner. Today, she could finally celebrate the New Year's Eve with her grandmother. She was very excited. When Madame Zhang saw that Qin Yining was as happy as a child, she could not help but laugh. As an elder, she was relieved that her child was doing well. After laughing for a while, Madame Zhang suddenly thought of something and said seriously, "Has Wang Yi taken control of the army?" She had heard that it was Pang Xiao who led the army into the city today that deterred the disaster victims. At the same time, he also forced Magistrate Yang to solve the civil unrest. Pang Xiao nodded and said, "For now, he has." He calmly told Madame Zhang about the situation in the army that he told Qin Yining on the way back. Madame Zhang shook her head and said, "I have a piece of advice, but I don't know if Wang Yi can listen to me." "Grandmother, please speak," Pang Xiao said seriously. Madame Zhang's expression was very serious. She also said seriously, "Wang Yi should not get involved in the army if possible. Try to hand over the power as much as possible." Qin Yining blinked in surprise. Pang Xiao did not know what to say for a moment. Pang Xiao bowed respectfully and said, "Grandmother, please enlighten me." Madame Zhang waved her hand and said, "You all came to the old capital suddenly this time. There are many things that you are not aware of. Back then, Dezhou conquered Dian. After occupying the capital, they arranged for the officials to be transferred. In order to show benevolence, they announced that the local people would be exempted from taxes for 10 years. Pang Xiao nodded and said, "There is indeed such a thing. However, the imperial treasury is empty. You all know that the imperial court can't afford to raise so many soldiers. However, they still need the army to control the situation in the south. Therefore, this army cannot be disbanded." Thus, the imperial court decreed that the local people in the old capital have to solve the problem of the army's rations themselves. However, the people in the old capital are exempted from taxes for 10 years. Without taxes, how can the local people pay the army? At this time, a person called Lu Zhang came up with an idea. This person is a local tyrant. He is very resourceful. He actually got in touch with the old four channels and made them agree to lend money to the army. The money solved the army's urgent problem. Lu Zhang made a lot of money from it. For example, he only needed 100 taels of silver, but he wrote 1,000 taels of silver on the IOU. The difference went into his own pocket. The ordinary soldiers could only eat and wear. Therefore, although the army looks stable now, there are many dangers. Firstly, the four channels will come to collect the debt at any time. As long as they do, there will be a big hole that you can't fill. Secondly, the money borrowed last time is probably almost used up. It is already the new year, and they will face the problem of paying the soldiers at the beginning of the year. Chapter 698. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao did not expect that there would be such an inside story in the army. They both had subordinates who had carefully investigated the situation in the army. But if Madame Zheng did not mention it, they would not have known. No wonder Lu Zhang got sick so easily and allowed Pang Xiao to gain control of the army so easily. It turned out that they were waiting for this. Regardless of whether it was Deng Minchang or Lu Zhang, if they continued to be the leaders of the army, wouldn't they have to think of ways to raise provisions for them? That was not all. The promissory notes that Lu Zhang wrote would all be given to Pang Xiao. No matter how big the hole was, Pang Xiao, the tall one, could shoulder it. They, who had profited from the middle, could shrink their necks and watch the show at any time. Pang Xiao had always been a resourceful person. He had always been the one scheming against others. Now that he was being schemed against by others, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. This is really pressing the gourd and lifting the ladle. Qin Yining shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "What are these people thinking in their heads? They have the leisure to scheme against their colleagues, but they have no time to do practical things for the people. If they used half of their scheming mind on serious matters, there would not be so many hungry people outside." Madame Zheng patted Qin Yining's shoulder comfortingly and said with a smile, "Isn't this human nature? They are only doing this because they are motivated by benefits. If there are no benefits, who would do this? As for working for the people, they would not care." Madame Zheng was speaking the truth. But when such a truth was heard, it made one feel powerless. The three of them could not help but fall into silence. After a long time, Pang Xiao said, "I understand, grandmother. It's just that I am now involved." Madame Zhang sighed and said, "It's all my fault for being locked up and delaying so many things. How can this be blamed on you? You were also implicated because of me and Sister Yi. Don't worry, I will think of a way to deal with these matters. I'm not a pushover either. If they want to use such a small matter to make things difficult for me, then they're wrong." Qin Yining calmed himself down and nodded with a smile. "That's true. Anyway, this isn't the first time we've encountered such a situation. We'll deal with whatever comes our way. What's there to be afraid of? To be able to grasp the army firmly in one's hands and use it at the crucial moment, that would be the greatest advantage. As for the rest, we can think of ways to solve them." When Madame Zheng saw that both Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were very cheerful and did not have the slightest bit of gloominess, she could not help but sigh in her heart. It was good to be young. When she was still young, all the big and small matters in the Duke's public house were handed over to her to manage. At that time, she did not think much of it. It seemed that no matter how many things there were, she would not worry too much. It was just a comprehensive consideration. It seemed that she was only like this because she was getting older. Why did she start to worry now that she encountered problems? Especially this time, she had originally taken the initiative to leave the mountain to help Qin Yining. Who would have thought that not only did she not help, but she also got herself implicated and almost lost her life? In the end, Qin Yining had to go through so much trouble to save her. Not only did she not help, but she also added to the trouble. It seemed that this era belonged to the younger generation. Madame Zheng's heart was filled with emotions. She had already made up her mind to retreat. "I'm getting on in years and my mind is not as clear as before. This time, leaving the mountain has also greatly damaged my vitality. Sister Yi, in the future, I plan to peacefully spend the rest of my life at home." When Qin Yining heard this, he was stunned. He was worried that his grandmother was saying this because she felt frustrated that she did not succeed. He wanted to persuade her. However, Madame Zheng saw through his thoughts. She smiled and waved her hand. You don't have to say anything. I know your intentions. It's just that I'm really tired. Madame Zhang's gaze fell on Pang Zhao's handsome face. She smiled and said, besides, now that you have someone to rely on, I can rest assured. At first, I was worried that you would be wronged because of the grudges of the previous generation. Now, it seems that I worried too much. Since you all have your own lives and have your own support and companionship, no matter how difficult the future is, there will be someone to support and accompany you. This old woman can also put down her burdens and peacefully spend the rest of my life. Madame Zhang's eyes were looking at Pang Zhao, but her words were directed at Qin Yining and also at the distant Sun clan. When Qin Yining heard his maternal grandmother's sentimental words, he actually felt a bit of the sorrow of a hero in his declining years. However, Madame Zhang was open-minded and did not mind. She said, I don't have subordinates like the Qing Tian alliance, but I have some connections and power. Just like the Qing Tian alliance in the past, they all have some beneficial relationships with each other. When I return, I will hand them over to you. You can use them for your own purposes, but you have to be careful not to be hurt by them. Maternal grandmother, I don't refuse. Madame Zhang smiled and patted Qin Yining's shoulder. She said, there's no harm in having more people. I know that with your abilities, you can control these people. You only need to order them around. When they encounter problems, you can help them solve them. After a long time, they will be like your subordinates. Seeing Madame Zhang's insistence, Qin Yining sighed softly and nodded. He owed too much and could only slowly repay her in the future. After all, Madame Zhang was old and had suffered in prison. Her body could not take it. After saying all that she needed to say, she was a bit tired. Qin Yining and Pang Zhao left. They did not care whether it was New Year's Eve or not. They did not want to disturb Madame Zhang and let her have a good rest. When Pang Zhao and Qin Yining returned to the bedroom, the wet nurses were taking a stroll in the room with their two brothers. When Pang Zhao saw his son, his eyes lit up with joy. He smiled and went over to carry brother Zhao, who was wearing a tiger head hat. Io, let me see if our brother Zhao has gained weight. Brother Zhao, do you still recognize your father? Brother Zhao stared blankly at Pang Zhao with his grape-like eyes. Then, he reached out to Qin Yining, who was beside him. He waved his arms and twisted his body. Clearly, he did not want to stay in Pang Zhao's arms and insisted on looking for Qin Yining. Pang Zhao felt sad and helpless. He was forced to go out. Even his own son did not recognize him. Brother Zhao, your father is here. Pang Zhao kissed Brother Zhao. His stubbled chin was prickly, and Brother Zhao burst into tears. The wet nurse was shocked. She was afraid that Wang Yi would blame her. She wanted to take the child but did not dare to. However, when Brother Han heard the crying, he also burst into tears. The wet nurse was immediately flustered. Qin Yining quickly took Brother Zhao and hummed a familiar tune. However, Brother Zhao stopped crying after a few breaths. He nestled on Qin Yining's shoulder and grabbed Qin Yining's hair with tears and snot hanging from his face. Pang Zhao sighed helplessly and said sadly, "Does our son not recognize me anymore?" Qin Yining was amused by his tone. "How old are you? Why do you still care about these things? The children are still young. You don't care about your appearance and you haven't been home for so long. It's normal for the children to be shy with strangers. You should spend more time with the children in the future. They will naturally become closer to you." "That's true, but I'm still not happy. If it weren't for the fact that there were so many terrible things happening in the imperial court, he would not have made such a fuss that his son did not recognize him." Qin Yining naturally knew that Pang Zhao was not really angry. However, the wet nurses did not understand. At this moment, they were so scared that their faces were pale and they did not dare to move. Seeing them like this, Qin Yining let them continue to take care of the two children. He pulled Pang Xiao to the bedroom to change clothes and wash up. The maidservants had already prepared hot water for Pang Xiao to bathe in. Qin Yining took off his outer robe and only wore his inner garment. He rolled up his sleeves to reveal his white elbows and stood outside the large wooden tub shrouded in mist to help Pang Xiao wash his hair and scrub his back. The sound of the water was seductive. Qin Yining's voice sounded even softer in the misty bathroom. Pang Xiao was a little dazed. His tired nerves suddenly relaxed and he felt a little drowsy. Qin Yining knew that he was tired, so he gradually stopped talking. His hands gently helped Pang Xiao scrub and he did not mind that he was sweating. After washing all the places he could reach, he saw that Pang Xiao had fallen asleep. He did not want to wake him up, so he stayed by his side and added hot water to the wooden tub from time to time. In fact, Pang Xiao did not sleep for long before the sound of firecrackers came from outside. It was New Year's Eve. Many people had already eaten dinner and were starting to set off firecrackers to celebrate. Pang Xiao was awakened by the sound of firecrackers. He saw that Qin Yining was still sitting by his side, using a wooden spoon to add hot water for him. He looked as if he was afraid that he would catch a cold. His heart melted into a bowl. Sister E. You're awake. They've already prepared the food. Let's go eat, then you can go back to bed and have a good sleep. Okay. Pang Xiao nodded with a smile and stood up casually. Qin Yining's face turned red. He quickly got up and went out. Pang Xiao could not help but laugh. After cleaning himself up neatly, he changed into clean clothes and went out with Qin Yining to have a reunion dinner with his half-dry hair. Qin Yining did not ask when Pang Xiao would return to the military camp. If he asked, Pang Xiao would still have to leave when it was time to leave. It would only make him sad. As long as he knew that he would not leave today and that their family could have a good reunion, that was enough. Some families were happy, while others were sad. Just as Qin Yining, Pang Xiao, and Madame Zheng were celebrating the new year with their family, Yu Qiyan and Gu Shixiang were trying their best to contact Sitong. In the past, they did not have to put in much effort, and the people from Sitong would take the initiative to come to them. Now that they wanted to meet the other party, they found that the other party was very mysterious. It was actually very difficult to find them. Gu Shixiang was very anxious. It had only been 2 days, but a string of blisters had already formed at the corner of his mouth. It was not easy until the 5th day of the new year that he finally managed to contact Mr. Liu, the accountant of Sitong who had been in contact with them all this time. Gu Shixiang hurriedly told Yu Qiyan to prepare a table full of food and wine. Then, that afternoon, he invited Mr. Liu to come over for a meal. The location was in the old imperial palace where Yu Qiyan lived. Mr. Liu looked to be in his early 40s. His facial features were well defined, and he had an elegant temperament. He did not look like the head of the household, but more like a teacher. Chapter 699. After 3 rounds of wine and 5 dishes, the atmosphere was warm and lively. Mr. Liu spoke in a cultured and refined manner. He had a good temperament and was very well-mannered. He would never take the initiative to make others look bad. Gu Shixiang and Yu Qiyan's words were very obviously flattering. Mr. Liu also went along with their words. The atmosphere was very good. When Gu Shixiang saw that the atmosphere had warmed up, he sighed helplessly and said, "Originally, I had asked Gao Wenyao to do that thing to share the burden of the head shopkeeper. Who would have thought that Gao Wenyao would act so righteous and awe-inspiring, but in reality, he had such a mischievous son. He caused so much trouble for no reason. This was really not our intention." Yes. Yu Yen also sighed and said, "This king is too honest." He fell into Gao Wenyao's trap. In the end, the matter developed so intensely. Even if we wanted to keep that person locked up, we were afraid that the people would be angry and make things unmanageable. Thus, we could only let them cause trouble. Gu Shixiang and Yu Yen sang the same tune, attributing all the reasons for this failure to Gao Wenyao's character. It was Gao Wenyao's deliberate concealment and deceit that led to such a big loophole. Actually, when the two of them said this, their faces were a bit flustered. Gao Wenyao's character was indeed problematic. However, as people who use people, they actually did not take these details into consideration before using them. This time, they lost to Pang Zhishi because of strategy. The problem did not only lie with Gao Wenyao. However, they urgently needed the powerful assistance of the four-way pass. If they wanted to restore the Dian dynasty, it was absolutely impossible to do so by relying on their scattered manpower and weak financial resources. In the past, Yu Yen still felt that he had the hearts of the people of the Yan dynasty. However, after witnessing the chaos of the people and knowing what the people really wanted, Yu Yen lost confidence in the hearts of the people. Thus, now he needed the favor of the four-way pass even more. He could not allow problems such as improper use of personnel, insufficient investigation, and careless planning to happen to him. When Mr. Liu heard this, he still had a warm smile on his face. He nodded gently in agreement. That's right. No one would have thought that Librarian Gao was that kind of person. This is really unexpected. When Gu Shixiang and Yu Yen heard this, instead of feeling relieved, they felt even more guilty. Mr. Liu was a cultured person. It was obvious that he didn't want to expose them in front of them. That was why he went along with them and left them some face. But even if they didn't expose the truth, it didn't mean that they would still be favored by the four-way shop in the future. The four-way shop only had good self-restraint, but they didn't come out to do good deeds for no reason. They needed a powerful assistant. With the financial resources and ability of the four-way shop, wouldn't people line up with just a flick of their finger? Gu Shixiang was a little anxious. He hurriedly stood up to show his loyalty. We feel very ashamed about this matter. However, if head shopkeeper has any other instructions in the future, you can just tell this old man. This old man is not talented, but I can still guarantee that I will do my best. When Yu Yen heard Gu Shixiang's words, he also nodded reservedly. He wasn't someone who could lower his face to speak softly. Just now, he had already broken through his limit by saying so much. No matter how bad it was, he had been a crown prince, an emperor, and someone who had been Wang Yi. However, when he saw Gu Shixiang nod and bow to others for his sake at such an old age, Yu Yen felt very uncomfortable. He couldn't ignore it and could only speak up himself. We don't lack sincerity. Mr. Liu smiled. Our head shopkeeper has always treasured your sincerity. This is just a small failure. The two of you don't need to take it to heart. When Gu Shixiang heard this, he couldn't help but reveal a relaxed expression. After calming down and thinking, he hurriedly said, "This is the head shopkeeper's kind intentions. However, we can't not appreciate it. We have been friends for a long time, but we have never had the chance to meet. Now, this old man is ashamed. Please, Mr. Liu, pass a message to the head shopkeeper. If the head shopkeeper can honor us with a simple meal, this old man will definitely welcome you with open arms." Some things were better discussed when they met face to face. They had the intention of seeking refuge, but they didn't even know whether the head shopkeeper of four-channel shop was round or flat. They had always relied on an accountant to pass on their message. Gu Shixiang was always worried that when Mr. Liu passed on his message to the head shopkeeper, he would accidentally misspeak. Mr. Liu saw that he was still smiling. He nodded gently and said, "I understand what you mean." However, our head shopkeeper is busy and may not be free. When the head shopkeeper is free and wants to meet the two of you, he will naturally come and disturb you." When Gu Shixiang heard this, his heart skipped a beat. It seemed that this head shopkeeper still didn't really care about them. In the end, they still didn't walk into that circle. Don't look at how the Yuchi Yen was the south protecting prince now. Perhaps the head shopkeeper of 4-channel shop didn't even care about the Yuchi Yen, Wang Yi, who didn't have any real power. If they really wanted to be seen in a different light and be recognized by the head shopkeeper of 4-channel shop, they would have to let the head shopkeeper see their abilities and use. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao didn't know the situation on the Yuchi Yan side. At this time, they were in the front hall, receiving the invitation from the servant. The servant sent by Magistrate Yang, who was standing in the middle of the hall, was very respectful when he saw Pang Xiao and Qin Yining. He said carefully, "My lord is holding a banquet at home tomorrow afternoon. He sincerely invites Wang Yi and Princess Yu to come." Pang Xiao opened the invitation and looked at it. A smile appeared on his lips. He put down the invitation and said gently, "This king came here, but actually, he didn't really meet Magistrate Yang. He was really busy with work and couldn't leave. Now that he has time, he should meet him and tell Magistrate Yang that this king will definitely come." "Yes, I will definitely pass on the message." The attendant bowed respectfully and retreated. Qin Yining leaned on the armrest of the chair and said thoughtfully, "When we first came, Magistrate Yang didn't even want to show his face. He has always been against you. Why did he send an invitation out of the blue this time? There must be something wrong. We have to be more careful." "You're right." Pang Xiao said seriously, "There is no good wine and no good banquet. I want to see if he, a dignified magistrate, has the ability to stir up trouble if he doesn't have the ability to do things well. It's really hard to say. After all, he can't do things well because he doesn't want to do things that aren't profitable. But stirring up trouble is what he wants to do. Naturally, it's different. I don't think Magistrate Yang is a stupid person. This time, we don't know what hole he has deliberately dug for us to jump into." Pang Xiao was very nervous about Qin Yining. He was afraid that Magistrate Yang would set up an ambush this time. As a rough man, he was fine, but Qin Yining was a weak woman. He was actually afraid that she would be in danger. "Why don't I go to the banquet by myself tomorrow? I think if I go alone, he won't stop me at the door. It's better if he doesn't let me in." Pang Xiao pondered and became more certain of his idea. "That's good. Then you don't have to worry about him harming you." Qin Yining didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm a woman in the inner house. What can Magistrate Yang do to me? If he wants to see you, he must have something to talk to you about. When I said he would dig a hole, I didn't mean he would really set up an inescapable net. I think if I let you bring the womenfolk, Magistrate Yang will probably send the womenfolk of Anpu Prefecture to accompany me. We womenfolk are just here to liven up the atmosphere and warm up the place. Think about it. If I don't bring the womenfolk, won't you two men quarrel if you don't agree with each other? If you part on bad terms, this banquet will lose its meaning, right?" Pang Xiao was stunned. Qin Yining's words made him understand. He suddenly felt that he was a little funny. "I'm really paranoid." Pang Xiao shook his head and said helplessly, "Since you went missing that time, I've become like a bird startled by the twang of a bow." "You're right. That's what I mean by bringing you there. Don't worry. I'll bring Jinghu Wei to protect our safety. As for what Magistrate Yang wants to do..." Pang Xiao sneered. "If he dares to do anything that crosses the line, I naturally have a way to deal with him." Qin Yining nodded with a smile. The two began to make arrangements for the banquet the next day. On the afternoon of the 6th day of the new year, Qin Yining coaxed the two children to sleep. He and Pang Xiao went to inform Madame Jing, and then they left in the carriage. In the carriage, Pang Xiao bent his long legs and reclined on the soft pillow. He played with the apple-sized brass bell on the small brass heater in Qin Yining's hand and said with a smile, "Sister Yi, when we go to the Yang family later, there's only one thing you need to pay attention to. Don't leave my sight. No matter what the womenfolk of the Yang family say or do, you only need to stay by my side. Do you understand?" Qin Yining was amused by Pang Xiao's seemingly casual but actually serious words. He said, "Don't worry. Where else can I go? Besides, Magistrate Yang doesn't dare to do anything to us. It's right to nip the problem in the bud. Anyway, don't leave my sight. Even if you want to change clothes, you have to ask me to accompany you." Qin Yining was amused and warmed. He helplessly rolled his eyes at him and said, "Do you think you can enter the washroom with me if you go with me?" "All right, don't worry." Pang Xiao didn't want to nag anymore, but he still recalled the terrain of the Yang family that he had scouted in advance. He also thought about the best escape route in case of danger. After making sufficient mental preparations, Pang Xiao felt a little more confident. Soon, the gorgeous carriage with a red roof slowly stopped in front of the Yang family's gate. Unexpectedly, the Yang family's gate was wide open. Magistrate Yang, dressed in casual clothes, was standing at the back with a middle-aged woman of medium build and two girls. He was leading the family servants to welcome them at the gate. Qin Yining looked out through the window screen and couldn't help but be startled. The middle-aged woman must be the magistrate's wife. Behind the magistrate's wife were two girls. One of them had a pretty face and a slender figure. She was somewhat similar to Magistrate Yang and should be the magistrate's daughter. On the other side, there was a tall and handsome girl dressed in men's clothing. She really attracted Qin Yining's attention. Chapter 700. Initiative. Everyone loved beauty. Even though they were both women, Qin Yining couldn't help but take a few more glances at the girl. The more she looked, the more beautiful she felt. Pang Xiao also looked up and saw the scene outside the carriage. Seeing that Qin Yining was staring at the girl, she snorted and turned her face to her. She whispered in her ear, "Why are you looking at others so seriously?" Qin Yining laughed and said, "Other than Auntie Chow, I have never seen such a beautiful woman. It's inevitable that I would take a few more glances at her." Pang Xiao snorted and said, "Look at yourself in the mirror before saying that you've never seen a beautiful woman." His tone was so sour that Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh. When the carriage stopped, someone lifted the curtains. Pang Xiao got out of the car first with steady steps. Seeing the tall and handsome Pang Xiao come out, the womenfolk behind Magistrate Yang glanced at him and then lowered their eyes at the same time. Magistrate Yang quickly walked up with a few people. Unexpectedly, Pang Xiao did not greet them first. Instead, she turned around and leaned into the carriage. She personally helped Qin Yining, who was wearing a red jacket and skirt with arrow sleeves, a cloak with white fox armpit fur collar, and a white fox fur inlaid with rubies, down from the carriage. Magistrate Yang had met Qin Yining once that day. However, the scene was too chaotic, and Qin Yining deliberately dressed up ordinarily, so Magistrate Yang did not observe him carefully. However, now that he saw it, he couldn't help but take a few more glances. Prince Zhongshuan and Wang Fei, one was handsome and domineering, the other bright and beautiful. They did not disguise the intimacy and warmth between them. It really was an enviable pair. Looking at their interactions, one couldn't help but smile from the bottom of their hearts. Magistrate Yang was already like this, so the womenfolk were even more touched. The wife and young miss of the magistrate looked at Pang Xiao and Qin Yining with emotion. Obviously, they were very curious about them. Qiu Fei Shan, who was dressed in men's clothing, had a calm expression on her face. She was just looking at the two with a decent smile. Qin Yining looked up and met Qiu Feishan's gaze. Qiu Feishan was obviously stunned for a moment, but she did not dodge. Instead, she smiled and nodded. Qin Yining also greeted her with a nod, but he was a little surprised. This lady was dressed in men's clothing, but it didn't seem like she was trying to disguise herself as a man. She was just wearing men's clothing in a carefree manner. She didn't deliberately hide that she was a woman, but she didn't deliberately act like a man either, as if wearing men's clothing was a matter of course. Qin Yining became more curious about Qiu Feishan. At this time, Magistrate Yang was already in front of them. Prince Zhongshuan, Princess Consort, you too grace my humble abode with your presence. Your presence brings light to my humble abode. Pang Xiao smiled and returned the greeting. Lord Yang is too polite. This king and my humble wife have disturbed you. Don't mention it, don't mention it. Princess Wang Yi, please. Magistrate Yang stepped to the side and made a gesture of invitation. Pang Xiao followed him politely. Qin Yining naturally fell 2 steps behind, walking together with the magistrate's wife and the 2 young ladies. The magistrate's wife intimately held Qin Yining's arm and said with a smile, "This is the first time I've met Princess Consort. You look very familiar, and there's no sense of unfamiliarity at all." Qin Yining smiled and readily said, "That's right. I also feel that the magistrate's wife looks very familiar." The 2 young ladies also feel the same. The 2 young ladies followed behind the magistrate's wife and Qin Yining. Hearing this, they both smiled. The Yang mansion wasn't very big. They passed through the front hall and went around a clean courtyard. Then, they turned a corner and arrived at the warm room used for receiving guests. Therefore, they didn't invite outsiders to the banquet this time. Only the 2 families gathered together. Therefore, when they arrived at the warm room, everyone sat around an 8-seater table. Magistrate Yang invited Pang Xiao and Qin Yining to sit at the head of the table. Then, he cupped his hands and said politely with a smile, "I've neglected you. I've never had a chance to gather with Wang Yi before. I've neglected you with such a simple banquet. Don't mention it." This king is also very happy to have a chance to have a chat with Magistrate Yang. Pang Xiao didn't seem to mind that Magistrate Yang had turned a blind eye to him before. When he first came to take office, Magistrate Yang didn't even show his face. Magistrate Yang also knew what he had done in the past. Anyone would feel uncomfortable in their heart. To be honest, Pang Xiao had caused so much trouble for him during the civil unrest. If he had his own intentions, he definitely wouldn't want to have any more interactions with Pang Xiao. But now, Magistrate Yang laughed and said, "This humble official feels the same. Wang Yi is shrewd and decisive in handling matters. This humble official has been looking forward to meeting Wang Yi for a long time." Looking at the women, Magistrate Yang said, "Wang Yi, Princess, this humble official will introduce you. This is my wife, Madame Yuan." The wife of the magistrate stood up and bowed to Pang Xiao and Qin Yining. Madame Yuan greets Wang Yi and Princess. No need for formalities. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining said in unison. Magistrate Yang pointed to a girl with a delicate face who was dressed in women's clothing and said, "This is this humble official's only daughter." Madame Yang immediately bowed as well. "Madame Yang, no need for formalities." Qin Yining smiled and helped her up. Magistrate Yang smiled and said, "This is my relative's daughter, Madame Qiu. Because of seniority, she calls me uncle." Qiu Feishan then stood up to greet Pang Xiao and Qin Yining. She did a woman's greeting, but she didn't have the slightest bit of pretentiousness. Instead, she exuded a graceful and free aura. Qin Yining smiled and said, "Madame Qiu, no need for formalities. Magistrate Yang explained again, the reason why she wears men's clothing is that her family is doing business. She is the only child in her family, so she has to take up the responsibility. Because it is inconvenient to wear women's clothing when walking outside, she began to wear men's clothing when she was young. Even if she doesn't hide that she is a woman, at least there is less trouble when walking around. That's right. Qiu Feishan also smiled. Wang Yi and Princess have seen a joke. Qiu Feishan was born beautiful, and this smile was even more stunning. Her eyebrows were similar to Qin Yining's. They were both long and slender eyebrows. The slanted arc wasn't ostentatious, but it added a heroic aura to their delicate faces. Qin Yining felt that this woman's temperament was gentle and elegant. She was a very cultured person. But he could clearly feel that this woman wasn't simple. Because her graceful aura couldn't be concealed. Even the prefectural magistrate's wife and daughter didn't have her noble aura. Qin Yining smiled and said, to be able to support your family business as a woman, it is truly admirable. What kind of business does Madame Qiu run? Qiu Feishan smiled and said, thank you for asking. My family's business dabbles in all kinds of businesses. We are not specialized enough, but we can still make ends meet. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. He knew that the other party wouldn't be direct and would just say some evasive words, so he didn't ask any more questions. At this time, there was a burst of melodious music coming from the hall. Servant girls wearing blue gowns came in and placed the exquisite dishes on the table one by one. Everyone tacitly changed the topic. They listened to the music, watched the singing and dancing, and ate the food and wine. Occasionally, they would chat about some unimportant topics. One side came prepared and tried to be easygoing. The other side wanted to curry favor and deliberately flattered. Therefore, the two sides became much more familiar with each other after a meal. When the servants brought in the tea tray, Magistrate Yang picked up the teacup and lightly coughed. The prefectural magistrate's wife immediately used a handkerchief to wipe the corners of her mouth. She stood up with a smile and said, "Excuse me." Then she left the warm room with the prefectural magistrate's daughter. The music stopped abruptly. The dancers bowed and the musicians who had only played half of the music left together. Qin Yining knew that they were going to talk about business. Chapter 701. When Qin Yining heard this, he couldn't help but look back at Qiu Feishan. He didn't expect this girl to be so generous as to contribute to the country. There was a faint smile on Qiu Feishan's face. Her temperament was as gentle as a piece of good ancient jade. People couldn't help but want to get close to her, but they were worried that the ancient jade would be unbearable. Qin Yining didn't believe that such a woman with a unique temperament and a natural noble aura would be an ordinary merchant's daughter. If she was just a merchant's daughter, why would Magistrate Yang go through so much trouble to help them meet? Pang Xiao carefully tied the ribbon on Qin Yining's collar. Seeing that Qin Yining was still looking at Qiu Feishan, who was wearing men's clothing, she frowned unhappily. She turned her little face back to her and tied the ribbon into a bow. She casually replied, "This king still needs to train the will of those children. But thank you for your kindness." After that, Pang Xiao took Qin Yining's hand warmer from Bing Tang. After testing the temperature, she put it in Qin Yining's hand and then said goodbye to Magistrate Yang. Magistrate Yang said with a smile, "Wang Yi, Princess, take care." Magistrate Yang, please stay. After the two sides were polite, Peng Xiao took Qin Yining and walked out of the Yang mansion side by side. Qiu Feishan stood there with a smile. She watched the two people walk away with a peaceful expression. Magistrate Yang frowned and said unhappily, "This Prince Zhongshuan doesn't know how to appreciate kindness." That day, I still thought that he was a smart and sensible person. Now, it seems that he is just an arrogant and conceited person. Qiu Feishan smiled and shook her head. She turned and walked to the warm room with a straight back. Magistrate Yang immediately chased after her and respectfully followed behind Qiu Feishan. Uncle Yang, don't mind. There is no need to be angry. I am very satisfied to see such a Prince Zhongshuan. Satisfied? He doesn't know how to appreciate favors and turns a blind eye to you. Qiu Feishan waved her hand, her white fingertips gently tapping her cuffs, her eyes drooping as she said, if he can be moved by such trivial benefits, then, before she could finish her words, Magistrate Yang immediately understood. He coughed awkwardly and said, that's true. Those who fawn on me make me unable to care for them. Qiu Feishan didn't say much, she just smiled calmly. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining returned to the mansion by car. They discussed what they had just seen and heard in low voices. That Lady Qiu is not simple. He was definitely not a simple businessman. She took the initiative to think of ways to make friends with us, and even invited Magistrate Yang to be her middleman, which is enough to show that Shemi's status has changed. Pang Xiao said, it doesn't matter whether it's simple or not. Whatever she wants to do has nothing to do with us. You're quite carefree. Qin Yining chuckled, why do I see that you are a little unhappy? Are you sulking with me? No way. Pang Xiao hugged Qin Yining and buried his face in his shoulder, I just don't like you staring at others. You have been staring at Lady Qiu since you saw her today. Qin Yining didn't know whether to laugh or cry, everyone loves beauty. Lady Qiu is a beauty. Naturally, I can't help but look at her a few more times. Besides, we are all women. Are you jealous? Pang Xiao wouldn't admit that he was jealous. He said seriously, who knows what she has in mind. You should be more careful. Qin Yining couldn't help laughing at Pang Xiao's awkward appearance. Pang Xiao saw Qin Yining nestled in his arms like a cute kitten and laughed so happily. Thinking back to what he said just now, he couldn't blame Qin Yining for laughing. Only now did he feel a little embarrassed. The next day, after the family had breakfast, Madame Jing put down the teacup and said, my health is much better now. I've also reunited with you and fulfilled my wish. Now, Sister Yi, you have a husband who dotes on you and a cute child. Although there will still be many difficulties in the future, as long as the two of you work together, there's nothing that can't be solved. I can also rest assured and retire in peace. Hearing Madame Zheng's words, Qin Yining frowned and said, Grandmother, what are your plans for the future? Madame Zheng smiled kindly. Her eyes were filled with nostalgia, but there was also some relief, I'm already so old. Even if I have the heart, I don't have the strength. The world now belongs to you young people. I also plan to go back and be an old woman who eats white rice. That's all. That day, Madame Zheng had said that she would give her all the connections under her. She was sure that her grandmother had made up her mind not to come out of retirement this time. Qin Yining didn't want to stop her because Madame Zheng was able to put down her hatred and retreat at the right time. She could use the remaining time of her life to enjoy life and be a happy old madam at home. This was actually the best choice for Madame Zheng. However, hearing that Madame Zheng really made this decision, Qin Yining felt a little disappointed. Silly girl. What are you thinking? In the future, you just have to focus on living your life with Wang Yi and teach Brother Han and Brother Zhao to grow up. This will be the best life. I know you're a smart child, and I believe you can do it. Qin Yining felt a little sad, but she still adjusted her emotions and said with a smile, Grandmother's decision is right. In the future, when we're free, we'll bring Brother Han and Brother Zhao to visit you, aunt and cousin-in-law. Good. Good. Madame Zheng smiled and then turned to Pang Xiao. You have to take what I said to you before to heart. In the future, your life will depend on you. Pang Xiao said respectfully, Yes, I'll remember it. I will also be filial to my father-in-law and mother-in-law. Grandmother, you don't have to worry. I know you're a filial child. Madame Zheng smiled with relief. That day, Madame Zheng brought Qin Yining to see Madame Ma, the shopkeeper of Madame Zheng's textile shop. She handed everything over to Qin Yining. When the two left, it was already afternoon. The winter afternoon sun wasn't very warm and seemed a little pale. The two of them didn't take a carriage. Instead, they walked on the quiet street in the thin layer of snow. Madame Zheng said, "Remember what I said. These people are double-edged swords. When you control them, you have to plan properly. They're not the same as the people from the Qingtian alliance. You have to be careful." "I understand. I'll know my limits. I'll also lend a hand when they need it. There's an entry and an exit. This kind of relationship will last." Madame Zheng smiled with relief and said, "It seems you understand what I mean. Wang Yi has already prepared the carriage for me. I plan to leave tomorrow." Qin Yining was stunned. He said with surprise and reluctance, "Grandmother, why are you in such a hurry to go back? It's not good to stay for a while longer. It'll be better to go back after the snow melts." "We can't wait. After the snow melts, there might be rainy days. Besides, the journey isn't very far. Wang Yi will make careful arrangements. You don't have to worry about your safety on the journey." Qin Yining persuaded Madame Zheng for a long time, but Madame Zheng was unmoved and insisted on going back. Qin Yining could only give up. Pang Xiao arranged for Jinghu Wei to escort Madame Zheng. Qin Yining sent Madame Zheng to the carriage. Although his nose was a little sore, he still had a bright smile on his face. "Grandmother, don't worry. When this matter is over, Wang Yi and I will bring my mother and 2 brothers to see you." "Okay. Then I'll wait." Madame Zheng's smile was unprecedentedly relaxed in the past 2 years. She still hadn't forgotten her deceased husband and children. The voices and smiles of those people were already engraved in her mind. She wouldn't forget them for the rest of her life. Even if she reached the end of her life, as long as she had these memories, she would be satisfied. She had already avenged her family and preserved the bloodline of the Sun family. She also tried her best to make up for the guilt she felt towards Qin Yining. Now that Madame Zheng had no more entanglements and worries, she wanted to live for herself for the rest of her life. The coachman and guards were ready. With a crack of the whip, the carriage slowly moved forward. Xiao Shua floated in the air and a thin white carpet was spread on the ground. Pang Xiao was afraid that Qin Yining would be cold, so he went forward to put his arm around her shoulder and comforted her in a low voice. "Don't be sad. There will be many opportunities to meet in the future. This is only a temporary separation." Qin Yining held back her tears and nodded with a smile. "You're right. If I miss you in the future, I'll just go and see you." Pang Xiao looked at her eyelashes that seemed to be wet from her tears and his heart had already melted into a puddle of water. At this time, no matter what Qin Yining said, Pang Xiao would agree without a frown. He did not care at all about his occasional lack of principles because being able to spend time with Qin Yining was his greatest joy. The two returned to the Fu. Just as they got off the carriage, the doorman came to report, "Wang Yi, Wang Fei, someone has just come. He says he is the shopkeeper of Four Pipes shop and wants to see Wang Yi." Pang Xiao exchanged a look with Qin Yining in shock and said in unison, "He's here." Ever since Pang Xiao heard Madame Zheng's analysis, he knew that the reason he had been able to gain control of the army so quickly was because he had fallen from one pit into another. That Four Pipes shop would give face to Lu Zhang, but might not give face to him. Also, the army was facing the time of payment, but other than being in debt, Pang Xiao did not even go out to borrow money. However, while Pang Shao was worried inside, his expression was calm. He pulled Qin Yining's hand and walked forward. As he walked, he said, "Have that person go to the front hall. Wang Fei and I will be there immediately." "Yes." The servant hurriedly went to give the order. When Qin Yining and Pang Shao came to the front hall, there was already a brazier with silver charcoal burning in it. The shopkeeper of Four Pipes' shop was sitting in the guest seat. Seeing Pang Shao come in with Qin Yining, that person hurriedly stood and bowed. "Wang Yi, Wang Fei, this one is surnamed Liu. I am the shopkeeper of Four Pipes' shop. I have come this time to discuss with Wang Yi the matter that the army owes Four Pipes' shop 3 million taels of silver." 3 million taels. Pang Shao was so angry he laughed. Chapter 702. What did 3 million taels of silver mean? That was a year's worth of food for a troop of 1,500,000 people. But how many people were there in the military? Even though the military number was 100,000, there were less than 100,000 people, including the workers who delivered the food and made the meals. 100,000 people, in less than a year, had used 15 times the amount of silver. Where did it all go? Pang Shao narrowed his eyes slightly as he sized up shopkeeper Liu of Four Access Shop. This person was of medium height, over 40 years old. His appearance was upright, and his entire body exuded a scholarly air. He had the temperament of a modest gentleman. He didn't seem like a shopkeeper at all, but more like a teacher. This person had a pair of overly bright and wise eyes. The intelligence between his brows could not be concealed. Pang Shao admitted that his ability to read people was not bad. He quickly concluded that this person was not a simple shopkeeper. So, why did the owner of Four Access Shop order this person to come here to press for the debt? Why would Four Access Shop so easily lend money to the ruffian Lu Zhang, and a large amount of 3 million taels of silver? Why would Lu Zhang fall ill so coincidentally? Was it really just to shirk responsibility? Pang Shao would definitely not believe that there was nothing fishy about this. There must be something fishy about this. The relationship between Four Access Shop and Lu Zhang needed to be pondered deeply. The purpose of Four Access Shop also needed to be carefully investigated. Countless thoughts turned in his mind, but on the surface, it only took a breath. Shopkeeper Liu heard Pang Zhao's words clearly and said with a smile, "Sir Liu is wholeheartedly working for the imperial court." Our head shopkeeper was moved by Sir Liu's sincerity and agreed to lend money. 2 times, a total of 3 million taels of silver. I think the lives of the soldiers in the military will improve because of this, and they will be more capable of fighting against foreign enemies. Although our head shopkeeper is a merchant, he still cares about the country and the safety of the people. At this point, shopkeeper Liu's tone changed, and his tone was full of helplessness and bitterness. However, it was easy to borrow money, but difficult to return the money. The first time our head shopkeeper went to ask for the money, Sir Liu said that the situation in the military was too tense and could not come up with the money in a short time. He could only wait for the first batch of money to come. Furthermore, he borrowed a second sum from our head shopkeeper. Our head shopkeeper is a warm-hearted person, thinking that with such a large army here and such a large amount of silver, the imperial court will not be greedy for the silver of us ordinary merchants and not return it. But who would have thought that after the head shopkeeper ordered many people to urge them several times, the army still did not respond, and even seemed to have some intention of shirking the responsibility. Until now, this lowly one had no other choice but to shamelessly seek you out, Wang Yi. Wang Yi has a high position and power. Not only is he the new commander-in-chief of the army, his position in the army and in the eyes of your majesty is not ordinary. If it was Wang Yi, he would definitely have a way to get the money to repay the debt. Qin Yining and Pang Shao listened quietly. Shopkeeper Lu was a person who would not leave any loopholes in his words. Moreover, his greatest characteristic was that no matter how urgent the matter was, his voice would not be raised at all. He would still use a kind and amiable tone to discuss things. Qin Yining felt that this person's background was not simple. He was definitely not, as he said, an ordinary head shopkeeper. Therefore, there must be some secret between the four-way shop and Lu Zhang. This time, they had clearly dug a trap for Pang Xiao to jump into, and Pang Xiao had already fallen into the trap. The matter of returning the money could not be easily agreed to. However, the problem was that Pang Xiao was the commander-in-chief of the army. Pang Xiao was in charge of all matters in the army. If Pang Xiao did not agree to return the money, the four-way shop would definitely spread the news that Pang Xiao borrowed money and did not return it. At that time, where would Pang Xiao's dignity be? However, there was indeed a problem with the money. Either Lu Zhang was greedy, or Lu Zhang was in cahoots with the four-way shop. The four-way shop did not lend Lu Zhang so much money at all, and Lu Zhang's IOU was also done in private. In this way, wouldn't the other party be able to say whatever they wanted? Pang Xiao and Qin Yining had the same thoughts. However, in this kind of situation, Qin Yining could not easily interrupt. She looked at Pang Xiao worriedly. She was afraid that Pang Xiao would easily agree to this kind of unreasonable matter because of his responsibility. There was no reason for the other party to dig a trap for them, and they had to suffer because of morals and other reasons. Pang Xiao could already feel Qin Yining's gaze. However, in this kind of situation, it was not suitable for him to talk to Qin Yining. His slender index finger gently tapped on the table. Pang Xiao smiled faintly and said, "Is the person who wrote the IOU this king?" Shopkeeper Lu understood when he heard this. He hurriedly said, "Wang Yi is of course not the person who wrote the IOU. However, Wang Yi is the person in charge here. Sir Lu is your subordinate. Whatever your subordinate does, you have to be responsible for it." Pang Xiao's smile deepened when he heard this. He leaned forward and said, "What you said makes sense." Shopkeeper Lu felt that Pang Xiao's tone was very strange. Although he was happy that Pang Xiao agreed with him and might agree to return the money, he still instinctively felt a bit of danger. He even unconsciously took half a step back. It seems that Wang Yi has decided to take on the responsibility. Pang Xiao smiled and said, "You said that I am the commander of the army and the person in charge of the army. Therefore, I should be responsible for whatever my subordinates do. However, all the land under the heavens belongs to the king. All the land under the heavens belongs to the king. Whether it is you, me, or Sir Lu, we are all your majesty's subordinates. We all work for your majesty. Why don't you go find your majesty to return the money?" Shopkeeper Lu's face immediately turned red. Qin Yining lowered his head. It took a lot of effort for him to control the smile on his lips. He forced himself not to laugh out loud and affect Pang Xiao's work. Shopkeeper Lu became anxious. He said in a low voice, "Wang Yi, you can't say that. Back then, Sir Lu borrowed money from our 4 clear channels, that is absolutely true. Now that Sir Lu is no longer in charge, the money borrowed from 4 clear channels can only be repaid by you, the Grand Marshal. If you insist on implicating His Majesty, wouldn't that be suspected of shirking responsibility? So you can see that this king is shirking responsibility." Pang Xiao stood up and walked in front of Shopkeeper Lu with his hands behind his back. Shopkeeper Lu was of average height, but Pang Xiao was tall and muscular. Pang Xiao even had to take 2 steps back and bend slightly to see Shopkeeper Lu's expression. Shopkeeper Lu said anxiously, "You can't do this. Back then, it was for the sake of the dynasty and the safety of the people that we took out such a large sum of money to lend to you to solve your urgent needs. But now that the crisis has been resolved, you want to go back on your words. Is this what a gentleman should do? If the people know about this, how will you be able to stand firm as the Grand Marshal? What a joke. Pang Xiao sneered, it is right and proper to repay debts. But that was only if the person who owed the money had to pay back the money. Did I write your IOU for someone else? And no. Shopkeeper Lu couldn't help but take 2 steps back. He even stuttered because of Pang Xiao's intimidating aura. No matter where you go, the person who wrote the IOU will be the one to ask for the money back. But according to your thoughts just now, won't you have to go to the capital to meet the emperor? When the time comes, you can say, your subjects owe you money and refuse to pay. As the ruler of the country, all the people are your subjects. Naturally, you have to think of a way to repay the money. If you say that, do you think you will still be alive? Shopkeeper Lu's brows furrowed together. Wang Yi, please be careful with your words. Pang Xiao dared to talk about your majesty, but Shopkeeper Lu didn't have Pang Xiao's courage and confidence. Pang Xiao said, Lu Zhang wrote the IOU. If you want to collect the money, you can go ask Lu Zhang. Your reasoning won't work. Shopkeeper Lu was rendered speechless. He rolled his eyes and covered his face with his sleeves as he began to sob. What should we do? Our 4-linked shop was willing to lend the money for the sake of the court. But now, the court has let us down. 3 million taels of silver is not a small amount. If we can't get it back, won't we suffer a great loss? Could it be that the imperial court is supposed to make all sorts of excuses like this? You, the newly appointed Grand Marshal, don't even care about what your subordinates do. What should we do? Shopkeeper Lu's voice was mournful and pitiful. Even so, his scholarly appearance didn't cause anyone to feel annoyed. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining looked at each other. Qin Yining lowered his eyes and pondered for a moment. He already had an idea. Don't cry. A gentle female voice interrupted Shopkeeper Lu's words. Shopkeeper Lu looked in the direction of the voice and saw Prince Zhongshuan's consort, who had been sitting to the side without speaking. It was said that this consort was very favored and respected by Prince Zhongshuan. Today, Prince Zhongshuan had come with Princess Consort to receive guests. It was clear that this woman was different from ordinary women of the inner residence. She could speak in front of Wang Yi. Shopkeeper Lu's heart skipped a beat. He turned and bowed to Qin Yining. Princess Consort, please don't blame me. This lowly one really doesn't have any other choice. This large sum of money can't be recovered no matter how long it takes. When I went to find Official Lu pushed it to Wang Yi. Now that I've come to ask Wang Yi pushed it to your majesty. This is simply making things difficult for me. Qin Yining had a sympathetic expression on his face. He said with righteous indignation, I know your difficulties. Don't worry, we will investigate this matter. If it is true, we will definitely give you an explanation. Shopkeeper Lu froze when he heard this. Are you speaking the truth? He couldn't help but look at Pang Xiao's expression. Pang Xiao was clearly unhappy. But in front of him, he didn't immediately refute Princess Consort. It was clear that he loved Princess Consort very much. Shopkeeper Lu sighed. Even heroes have a weakness for the charms of a beauty. He bowed to Qin Yining again and again. Thank you, Princess Consort. Thank you, Princess Consort. As long as you give us these words, we can be at ease. Qin Yining smiled and comforted Shopkeeper Lu. Then he served tea and sent the guests out. Chapter 703. Pang Xiao's face was still a little tense, but when he faced Qin Yining, his expression involuntarily relaxed. He first sighed and admitted, I was really angry. That's why I acted so impulsively. Qin Yining sighed in understanding. No matter who it was humiliating to find out that they had fallen into someone's trap after solving a problem in the field they were best at, and that someone had done it on purpose. Qin Yining stood behind him. She went around the back of the chair and wrapped her arms around his neck. She pressed her face against the side of his face. I understand. This time, it's obvious that you were tricked by someone. It's very likely that these people had already set up a trap before they found out that we were about to arrive at the old capital. When we first arrived at the old capital, we were just busy thinking about how to gain a foothold. Then, we had no choice but to fall into their trap. Qin Yining's voice was as gentle as water. Peng Zhao's body and mind relaxed because of this. He couldn't help but turn his head and gently kiss the corner of her mouth. Qin Yining smiled and allowed him to do as he pleased. She said, this Sidong number probably has someone backing them. Otherwise, why would they set up a trap early on to target us? In the old capital, the answer to who hates us the most is already self-evident. Yu Qiyan isn't that capable. I suspect that this is all Gu Shixiang's doing. As expected of the old emperor's tutor who has been an official for 3 dynasties. His methods are still as good as they were in the past. Pang Xiao sighed. If Yu Qiyan didn't have Gu Shixiang by his side, I'm afraid that he would have given up long ago and quietly become a rich and idle person. He would have let your majesty take care of him while he obediently stayed in the cage to study calligraphy and painting. That might not be a bad thing for him. Qin Yining also felt a little emotional. Although she didn't have a close relationship with the Yu Qiyan in the past, she had even offended the Yu Qiyan because she refused to marry him. However, Yu Qiyan was, after all, an upright person. He was 1,000,000 times better than his fatuous ruler father. He had the people and the country in his heart. It was just that he was not capable enough and did not have the ability to be the ruler of a country. But overall, he was not a bad person. But now, he had embarked on the path of fighting for power and profit. As early as when he was persuaded by Gu Shixiang to abandon his wife and concubines to search for the treasure, he was no longer the pitiful monarch of a fallen country who cared about the people and failed purely because he was powerless. Qin Yining said, the Yu Qiyan will definitely target us. Since Sidong number was willing to listen to the Yu Qiyan's orders and set up this trap, we should make them pay a price. Pay the tuition. Pang Xiao looked back at Qin Yining. Qin Yining leaned close to Pang Xiao's ear and whispered his idea. A smile gradually appeared on Pang Xiao's face as she listened. In the end, she gently scratched her perky nose. You little scoundrel. Is that why you stopped me just now? Yes. That shopkeeper Lu was still thanking you profusely. If he knew that he was going to be tricked, he might cry again. Qin Yining smiled a little embarrassedly. If I had a choice, I wouldn't want to do this. This method is actually a little dishonorable. But there's no reason why we can't fight back when they want to harm us. Is it moral for them to harm others? This is not the time to talk about morality. I'm not a kind person. If someone slaps my left cheek, I'll smile and stick out my right cheek. Pang Xiao saw that she was very angry. He couldn't help but smile and pat her shoulder comfortingly. He stretched out his long arm and pulled her around the back of the chair to sit on his lap. His arms encircled her and he first pecked her forehead. You don't have to feel bad because you didn't do anything wrong. If you didn't stay calm, I might have missed the best opportunity to fight back. As he said this, Peng Xiao felt that he was very lucky to have such an intelligent and virtuous wife. Sister Yi, why are you so nice? Peng Xiao's deep voice whispered into Qin Yining's ear, I like you. I like you more and more. His voice was like the sound of a zither and his warm breath was right beside her ear. Qin Yining was hugged by him and she was surrounded by his familiar refreshing scent. Her entire heart was so soft that it was about to melt. Qin Yining's face was red as she leaned into Pang Zhao's embrace and buried her face in his chest. She felt unprecedentedly peaceful and calm. No matter what happened now, as long as Pang Zhao was with her, she would not be afraid. Pang Zhao followed Qin Yining's method and immediately ordered people to spread the news in the city. Tomorrow afternoon, in the big square outside the porridge factory, Prince Zhongshuan had something important to say to everyone. Although the people in the old capital were not so poor that they needed to eat porridge, the influence of the refugees was still very large. Qin Yining asked Lu Dehan to continue to open porridge stalls since the first day of the new year to help these poor people survive the harsh winter. Although these people would come to get porridge at a fixed time every day, they still had to go home. They lived in different parts of the city, and the neighbors heard a lot of good things about Prince Zhongshuan from the refugees. There were even some people who, while chatting on the streets and alleys, would tell the story of how Prince Zhongshuan turned the tide, how he punished the evil, and how he killed the evil Gao Wenyao into a wonderful book. Magistrate Yang, Yu Qiyan, and the local gentry had already booked a private room on the second floor of a nearby tea house. They were waiting to see what Prince Zhongshuan was going to do with their own eyes. Qin Yining didn't go to the private room. Instead, he was surrounded by Jing Huwei and the silver-masked spies, waiting in a carriage at the corner of the street. Pang Zhao was wearing a python robe and a black sable fur cloak. He walked to the middle of the empty space and directly cut to the chase, fellow villagers. Today, this king has gathered everyone here because he has something to tell everyone. Such an amiable and approachable tone made the commoners feel very comfortable. His usual words were easily understood by the commoners who didn't know how to read. Pang Zhao said, "Everyone knows that this king came here to take up the position of Grand Marshal. It's also his first time here, so he's just beginning to understand everything here. Just yesterday, this king heard a shocking piece of news." He deliberately paused here to arouse everyone's curiosity. Even Yu Qiyan, Magistrate Yang, and the others who were sitting in the private room were curious and held their breaths. Pang Zhao said, "Yesterday, this king found out that the army owed a debt of 3 million taels of silver." As soon as this was said, everyone was shocked. Some people, such as Yu Qiyan, didn't expect Pang Zhao to say this. There were also people, such as Magistrate Yang, who observed Pang Zhao's expression with interest after the shock. The people were even more shocked. What did 3 million taels of silver mean? These ordinary people might not have the chance to see 30 taels of silver put together in this lifetime. 3 million taels of silver. They couldn't even begin to imagine how much it would cost. This was an astonishingly huge sum of money. Everyone started to discuss why the army owed so much money. Pang Zhao said again in a loud voice, "I think everyone wants to know what's going on, right?" Back then, when Yan country was just incorporated into Dezhou, Your Majesty considered that the people were living too hard, so he exempted the local taxes for 10 years. Everyone knows about this. As for the army, these 100,000 soldiers have to be stationed here in order to protect the country. Everyone knows that the Tatars in the north are not obedient. Right now, the north is at war as we speak. Your Majesty is now thinking about how the people in the north will not be bullied by the Tatars, so he can only order the army to raise their own provisions. But, without taxes, where will the provisions come from? Chapter 704. Sitong's actions are truly benevolent and righteous. Not only did they help the army solve their biggest problem, they also indirectly ensured the safety of our old capital. At least everyone doesn't have to worry about being attacked by foreign enemies and can be assured of their own safety. Pang Zhao was quite moved when he said this. In today's world, there aren't many people who are as benevolent and righteous as Sitong. If it were someone else, wouldn't they announce their good deeds to the whole world? But Sitong is different. They do good deeds in a low-key manner and don't want to announce their good deeds. They only do what they can for everyone in silence. This king is really touched by their spirit. Pang Shao shook his head and sighed. His words were full of emotion. When the people around saw this, they couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect there to be such good people in the world. Yes, it's a pity that we are a bunch of poor people. Otherwise, we would definitely buy Sitong's products. You don't know, right? Sitong has everything. Even when we go on a boat, the name of Sitong is engraved on the oars. You're boasting again. You can't read, how can you recognize the name of Sitong? I heard it from someone. It can't be wrong. Everyone was discussing. Everyone gave Sitong a thumbs up for doing good deeds in a low-key manner. Pang Shao saw everyone praising Sitong and gave them enough time to discuss. He then said in a clear voice, Sitong is benevolent and righteous. They have the country and people in their hearts. But our army owes Sitong money. Are we not going to pay it back? His words attracted everyone's attention back to him. Pang Shao said with full vigor, no matter how benevolent they are, we can't let them take out money for nothing. 3 million taels of silver is not a small amount. Shopkeeper Liu of Sitong went to complain tearfully to this king. They almost couldn't pass the new year this year. They spent 3 million taels of silver and still haven't paid it back. Although this king is new to the post of marshal, he still felt very apologetic. Today, this king will say it here. This money must be paid back. We won't let Sitong, who is a kind merchant, suffer. If you can't, then you are an incompetent official. As soon as this was said, the people cheered and praised Pang Zhao's responsible behavior. Because his words had already made it clear that this money was not borrowed by Pang Zhishi, but owed by the previous Pang Zhishi before he took office. This matter had nothing to do with him. But after he took office, he still shouldered this responsibility without hesitation and gave 4-Channel a promise. Pang Zhao's image in the eyes of the common people had been raised by such a straightforward and responsible way of doing things. This was especially true for those refugees who had witnessed Pang Zhao punishing historian Gao. At this moment, the name of God of War Wang Yi was deeply ingrained in their hearts. The people cheered and praised Pang Zhao's actions. The passers-by in the private rooms were all shocked, as if they had been struck by lightning. Yu Qiyan clenched his fists tightly. His face was flushed with shock and anger. Who would have thought that Pang Zhao would act so unconventionally? Would a normal person know that there was a trap in front of them, and still step into it without hesitation? Pang Zhao was clearly not the one who had borrowed the money, but now he had to pay it back. Moreover, 3 million taels of silver was not a small sum of 3 or 2 copper coins. Where did he get the confidence to make such bold claims in front of everyone? Was he not afraid that if he couldn't take out the money in the future, people would remember what he said today and criticize him? Or was it that Pang Zhao already had 3 million taels of silver in his hands, and now he was shouting just to make a name for himself? However, even if he had the money, was 3 million taels of silver something that he could casually take out to fill a hole for others? Yu Qiyan didn't understand Pang Zhao's actions. He really didn't understand. Yu Qiyan couldn't help but curse out in a low voice, "You're really sick." Hearing this, Gu Shixiang looked at Yu Qiyan and shook his head. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. If Yu Qiyan had half of Pang Zhao's skill and political brain, he wouldn't have to worry about these court affairs at such an old age. Wang Yi, this is precisely where Prince Zhongshuan's brilliance lies. Gu Shixiang sighed and said, if he completely ignores the matter, isn't he afraid that the four-way signal will spread the news that the army general owes money and doesn't pay it back? Yu Qiyan was speechless. Thinking carefully, this was indeed the case. Even if he lost a bit, it was worth it for someone like Pang Shao if he didn't have to bear the infamy. However, to be able to take out 3 million taels of silver in one go was enough to prove Pang Zhao's financial resources and courage. Gu Shixiang saw the change in Yu Qiyan's expression and knew that he must have misunderstood. He said helplessly, "Wang Yi, don't tell me you think that Pang Zhishi will pay the debt out of his own pocket. Isn't that the case?" Yu Qiyan asked in surprise and confusion. Gu Shixiang had the urge to facepalm. Even his voice became a bit weak. He must have thought of other ways to get money in advance. Either he can get this huge sum of money, or he has a way to make the four-way signal unable to ask for money. In short, Peng Zhishi definitely won't take out such a sum of money to cover the hole. He is the army general. If he falls into a trap this time and has no choice but to pay out of his own pocket, then in the future, if he encounters such a situation again, there will be people who will make him suffer. After a long time, won't no amount of money be enough? 1-inch people are selfish. Maybe when he is not willing to pay, people will say that he is not willing to contribute to the country and Li Qitian will complain about him. Gu Shixiang's voice was very gentle when he said this. He was already using his greatest patience. He was already at this age. If he couldn't teach Yu Qiyan well before he died, his final dream in this life would not be considered complete. However, Yu Qiyan didn't understand. At least, he hadn't thought it through yet. Sure enough, just as Yu Qiyan and Gu Shixiang were talking, Peng Shao had already spoken in a clear voice again. "Magistrate Yang is here, right?" He looked directly at the window on the second floor of the restaurant. From Yu Qiyan's angle, what he saw was Peng Shao looking in his direction. Just as Yu Qiyan was surprised, all the people had already looked in the direction of Peng Zhao's sight. In the private room next to Yu Qiyan's, Qiu Feishan glanced at Magistrate Yang with a faint smile and said, "You'd better show up. If you insist on not showing up now, people will definitely say that you are a coward in order to avoid responsibility." Magistrate Yang's forehead was throbbing. The feeling of stepping into a trap when he knew it was really not good. But as Qiu Feishan said, could he be a coward? If he really did that, how could he establish his authority in the old capital in the future? Magistrate Yang gritted his teeth and had to stand up. He walked to an angle where people outside couldn't see Qiu Feishan and opened the window. The people outside immediately saw Magistrate Yang's figure. Because Magistrate Yang had agreed to the people's conditions last time, everyone thought that Magistrate Yang was a very good official who worked for the people. So at this time, everyone looked at him with eyes full of expectation and admiration. Seeing this, Magistrate Yang could only squeeze out a smile and salute. "How did Wang Yi know that I'm here?" Peng Shao returned the salute and shouted across the crowd, "Magistrate Yang cares about the people. What's more, you must have known that this king wants to talk to the people. Why didn't you come, Magistrate Yang?" Without giving Magistrate Yang time to react, Peng Shao said again, "Folks. Magistrate Yang is here today. This king will give an explanation in front of everyone." He looked directly at Magistrate Yang and ordered, "Magistrate Yang, this king gives you 3 months to return the 3 million taels of silver to Sitong. If you can't return it, you don't have to be a magistrate anymore." Magistrate Yang was so angry that he almost fell down. At first, when he heard Peng Zhao's words, he thought that Peng Zhao wanted to pay the money himself. He was just waiting to see how Peng Zhao would cover up this lie. Who would have thought that this shameless guy actually asked him to pay the money? Magistrate Yang almost scolded him on the spot. But downstairs, many pairs of eyes were looking at him expectantly. Magistrate Yang was now tied to the high platform of morality. As long as he still wanted to maintain his reputation and continue to be an official here, he couldn't shake his head now. Because the army had always been a sharp weapon for war. It wasn't something that could be produced. Your Majesty ordered the army to raise their own salaries and pay. He wanted the local government to pay for it. This was reasonable and legal, a matter of course. But there was no tax in the old capital. Wang Yi. Magistrate Yang opened his mouth. His throat was very dry. But in the next moment, Peng Zhao's actions made Magistrate Yang so angry that his nose was crooked. Peng Zhao actually cupped his hands to the people and left with his men. This guy threw such a big black pot to him, and then patted his butt and left. Magistrate Yang gritted his teeth. For a moment, he couldn't understand how there could be such a shameless person in the world. How could he call himself a hero? He didn't even give him a chance to decline. Magistrate Yang cupped his hands to the people who were full of admiration and forced himself to show a gentle smile to appease them. Qin Yining watched the whole thing from the horse carriage. On the way back to the mansion, the smile on the corner of her mouth didn't fade. She helped Pang Xiao come up with an idea, but she didn't expect Pang Xiao to be so interesting. He handled the matter so well that she, who knew about it, laughed all the way. When she thought of Magistrate Yang's forced smile after being bullied, Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh again. When they arrived at the entrance of the Qin mansion, Peng Xiao had been waiting for Qin Yining for a long time. Seeing that she had returned, Peng Xiao came forward to replace Bing Tang and Ji Yun. He helped Qin Yining out of the carriage. "Why are you laughing like that? Is it that funny?" Peng Xiao tapped Qin Yining's forehead lightly. Qin Yining nodded. "You didn't see Magistrate Yang's face. Every time I think of how he once schemed against you, but now he is trapped by your open scheme and can't fight back, I want to laugh." Conspiracies were important, but the most interesting thing was still an open conspiracy. It was obvious that you were telling the other party, but you used your strength to crush them. Only then would you feel a sense of accomplishment. When the two entered the mansion, Peng Xiao held Qin Yining's small and fair hand with his large hand. He smiled and said, "He won't let this go. I think he'll be here soon." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.